The moment Richard Blackwell tried to end my 25-year career with a dismissive wave and a manila envelope, he thought he was dealing with a naive technologist who would quietly disappear. What he didn't know was that I'd spent the last 6 months documenting his betrayal of the company we'd both helped build. He expected tears or begging. Instead, I smiled and accepted his severance offer, knowing that in exactly 24 hours, I wouldn't be clearing out my office. I'd be sitting in his chair, watching security escort him from the building. After a quarter-century of being underestimated, I was about to show him exactly what happens when you mistake dedication for weakness and loyalty for blind trust. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I felt my heartbeat steady as the security guard at Meridian Technologies, new hire who didn't recognize me after my 25 years with the company, handed me a visitor badge. "Floor 30, right? For the board meeting?" he asked. I nodded, running my fingers across the temporary plastic card that read simply, "Guest." If only Richard knew what kind of guest I'd be today after callously tossing me aside yesterday, like a disposable component in his corporate machine. 25 years I'd given to this company, 25 years of my life, building Meridian's software division from a struggling department into the crown jewel of the corporation. And yesterday, Richard Blackwell, the man I'd helped promote to COO 3 years ago, had called me into his office with a practiced look of regret on his face. "Unfortunately, we're restructuring the division," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Your position is being eliminated, effective end of the month. The severance package is generous. 2 months' salary." "I'm sorry, Teresa. Business decisions, you understand." I'd nodded, maintaining my composure as he slid the manila envelope across his desk. The same desk I'd helped him select when he moved into the corner office that should have been mine. What Richard didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that I'd seen this coming 6 months ago. The furtive meetings, the sudden interest in my division's proprietary technology, the mysterious consultants surveying our operations, and most importantly, he had no idea what I'd been doing since I first noticed these warning signs. Now, as the elevator climbed to the 30th floor, I thought about the board members waiting in the conference room, about Richard's smug certainty that by this time next week, my division's revolutionary new software platform, the one I'd personally guided through development for the past 3 years, would be sold to our biggest competitor for a figure that would make the shareholders very happy and the executive team even happier. What Richard didn't know was that today's board meeting wasn't about approving his secret sell-off plan. It was about something else entirely. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the executive floor I rarely visited. By design, Richard had kept me away from the board for years. Administrative assistants and junior executives glanced curiously in my direction as I walked confidently toward the boardroom. Through the glass walls, I could see them already assembled. 12 board members, the company's legal counsel, and Richard standing at the head of the table, mid-presentation. Patricia, the CEO's executive assistant, intercepted me with a knowing smile. "They're expecting you, Ms. Harmon," she said, one of the few allies I'd cultivated over the years. "Shall I announce you?" "No need," I replied, adjusting my blazer. "I believe my timing is perfect." As I pushed open the heavy boardroom door, Richard froze mid-sentence, confusion flickering across his face before he composed himself. "Teresa," he said, his voice carrying that familiar condescending tone. "We're in the middle of a board meeting. Perhaps we can discuss your transition plan later this afternoon." Several board members shifted uncomfortably. They knew why I was here, even if Richard didn't. "Actually," I said calmly, placing my briefcase on the table, "I'm here at the board's request." Richard's expression shifted from confusion to annoyance. "I don't understand." "Teresa, thank you for joining us," interrupted Diane Morrison, the board chairperson, standing to welcome me. "We were just reviewing the company's intellectual property portfolio, and your insight would be invaluable." The color drained from Richard's face as Diane gestured for me to take the empty seat, the one directly opposite him at the other end of the table, the seat traditionally reserved for honored guests or incoming executives. "What exactly is going on here?" Richard demanded, looking around the room. "Please, continue your presentation," I said, nodding toward his slides. "You were explaining how Meridian's proprietary software assets could be better leveraged through a strategic partnership. I'm particularly interested in your valuation of the Aurora platform." The platform my team had built. The platform Richard had systematically kept hidden from the board. The platform he planned to essentially give away to Global Systems in exchange for a lucrative executive position once the partnership was complete. "I think," said Leonard Foster, our longest-serving board member, "that we should move directly to the second agenda item. Teresa has prepared some information that the board needs to review before any decisions about our technology assets are made." Richard remained standing, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of his chair. "This is highly irregular. Ms. Harmon is no longer in a decision-making capacity at Meridian." Actually, interrupted Diane, "no personnel changes at the executive level have been approved by this board, so perhaps we should all take our seats and continue." The tension in the room was palpable as Richard slowly sank into his chair, the realization dawning that something had gone very wrong with his carefully orchestrated plan. I opened my briefcase and removed the dossier I'd spent months compiling: emails, meeting recordings, financial projections, and the independent valuation of the Aurora platform showing it was worth nearly triple what Richard had presented to the board. "Before we begin," I said, making eye contact with each board member, "I want to thank you all for your willingness to hear me out. What I'm about to share isn't just about my position at Meridian. It's about the future of this company and the technology we've all worked so hard to develop." As I distributed copies of my presentation, my mind drifted back to that fateful day 6 months ago when I'd first discovered Richard's betrayal, not just of me, but of the entire company. I'd been working late, finalizing the Aurora platform's security protocols. The office was nearly empty, just the cleaning staff and a few dedicated developers on my team. I'd headed to the executive floor to use the high-speed printer for some technical diagrams, not expecting anyone to be around at that hour. That's when I heard Richard's voice coming from the conference room, the door slightly ajar. "The beauty is that the board has no idea what this technology is actually capable of," he was saying to someone. "They think it's just an incremental improvement to our existing systems. By the time they realize what Harmon's team has actually built, the deal will be done." I'd frozen in the hallway, listening as Richard laid out his plan to a man I later identified as the VP of Acquisitions at Global Systems, our biggest competitor. They were discussing not just the sale of my technology, but how Richard would be brought on as Chief Innovation Officer at Global once the strategic partnership was finalized, with a compensation package worth millions. "What about Harmon?" the other man had asked. Richard's laugh still echoed in my memory. "Teresa? She's been with the company so long she's practically furniture, loyal to a fault. By the time she figures out what's happening, she'll be packaged up with a modest severance and shown the door. She's too trusting, too focused on the technology to see the business angles. Always has been." That night had changed everything. The mentor I'd trusted, the company I'd helped build, the future I'd planned, all of it suddenly uncertain. But instead of confronting Richard immediately, I'd made a different choice. I'd started gathering evidence, building relationships with key board members, and documenting exactly how Richard had been systematically undermining Meridian's interests to position himself for a lucrative exit. Now, as the board members opened the folders I'd distributed, I watched Richard's face. The confidence was draining away, replaced by something I'd never seen in him before. Fear. "The first document," I began, is a comprehensive valuation of the Aurora platform by Morton Technology Assessments, showing a market value of approximately $2.3 billion, significantly higher than the $800 million figure presented in today's earlier slides. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Richard began to interject, but Diane held up her hand, silencing him. The second document contains emails and meeting transcripts documenting conversations between our COO and executives at Global Systems, dating back nearly 8 months. These discussions centered not on a strategic partnership, but on what amounts to a structured acquisition of our core technology at a fraction of its market value. The room had gone completely still. Even the usual sounds of the City 30, floors below seemed muted as the board members flipped through page after page of damning evidence. And finally, I said, reaching the most difficult part, you'll find documentation of a proposed compensation package for Richard at Global Systems, contingent upon the successful transfer of Meridian's intellectual property, specifically the Aurora platform, to their control. This package includes a senior executive position and equity grants valued at approximately $15 million. Leonard Foster removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. Richard, is this accurate? Richard's face had gone from pale to flushed, his jaw working as he struggled to formulate a response. This is a complete mischaracterization. These documents are taken out of context. Teresa is clearly retaliating because of the restructuring decision, which you had no authority to make, interjected Diane. Executive personnel changes require board approval. The timing was sensitive. I was planning to brief the board today after the partnership agreement was already in motion? Asked another board member, his tone incredulous. Richard stood abruptly. I need to consult with legal counsel before this goes any further. This ambush is completely unprofessional. Please sit down, Richard, Diane said, her voice carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. Our general counsel is already present, and he's reviewed all of these documents. Haven't you, Michael? The company's general counsel nodded gravely. I have, and I've advised the board that they represent, at minimum, a serious breach of fiduciary duty. Richard remained standing, his gaze now fixed on me with undisguised hatred. You've been planning this for months, he said quietly. All those questions about the partnership, the sudden interest in board presentations, you were spying on me. I met his gaze steadily. I was protecting the company, the same company I've dedicated 25 years of my life to building, the same company you were preparing to sell out for your own gain. That's rich coming from you, Richard scoffed. Always hiding in your development lab, letting others handle the hard business decisions. You think building good technology is enough? This industry eats idealists like you for breakfast. I was doing what needed to be done. By selling our most valuable asset for a third of its worth? The board members watched our exchange in silence. The evidence spread before them, telling a story that needed no embellishment. Diane finally stood. I think we've heard enough. Richard, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the room while the board discusses next steps. Richard hesitated, clearly searching for a way to regain control of the situation. Finding none, he gathered his presentation materials with shaking hands. This isn't over, he muttered as he passed my chair. Actually, I replied quietly, I think it is. As the door closed behind Richard, the room erupted in questions. For the next hour, I walked the board through the technical specifications of the Aurora platform, its market applications, and the true value it represented, not just financially, but strategically for Meridian's future. When we finally emerged from the boardroom, Richard was waiting in the hallway, his face a mask of controlled fury. Patricia, the CEO's assistant, approached with 2 security officers. Mr. Blackwell, she said professionally, These gentlemen will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings." Richard stared in disbelief. "You can't be serious. I built this company's strategy for the past decade. One presentation from a disgruntled employee, and you're throwing away everything I've accomplished?" Diane stepped forward. "The board has voted unanimously to terminate your employment, effective immediately. We'll be conducting a full investigation into all partnership negotiations and technology valuations conducted under your authority." Richard's gaze swung back to me, his eyes narrowing. "You think you've won? You're still the same naive idealist who needs others to fight her battles. You'll never survive at this level. You're too soft for the corporate world. Always have been." As he was led away, those words hung in the air between us. The same dismissive assessment he'd always made of my character and capabilities. But this time, they held no power. The woman he'd underestimated had just orchestrated his downfall, not through manipulation or betrayal, but through truth and principled action. Patricia approached me as the elevator doors closed on Richard and his security escort. "The board would like you to rejoin them, Ms. Harmon." "What happens now?" I asked, suddenly aware that I'd been so focused on exposing Richard's betrayal that I hadn't fully considered the aftermath. Patricia smiled. "Now? Now they discuss your new role as acting chief operating officer." As I turned to re-enter the GIU boardroom, I caught my reflection in the glass wall, a person transformed by betrayal, not broken by it. Richard had been right about one thing. I wasn't like him. And that, I now realized, had always been my greatest strength. The day after the board meeting, I arrived at Meridian Technologies with a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. For the first time in 25 years, I used the executive elevator instead of my usual route through the software division's side entrance. The security guard, the same young man from yesterday, did a double take when I approached the desk. "Good morning, Ms. Harmon," he said, suddenly formal. "I have your new access card ready." He handed me a sleek black card with gold lettering. "Teresa Harmon, Acting Chief Operating Officer." The weight of it in my palm felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. "Thank you." I paused, reading his name badge. "Greg, I appreciate it." "My pleasure, ma'am. And, congratulations on the promotion." News traveled fast. By the time I reached the 30th floor, Patricia was waiting for me by the elevator. "The executive team is assembled in the conference room," she said, falling into step beside me. "They're anxious." I could imagine. Most of them had been handpicked by Richard over the years, forming a tight circle of loyalty around him. To them, I was the outsider who had orchestrated their leader's sudden fall from grace. "How many know the full story?" I asked. "Only what HR has told them, that Richard was terminated for breach of fiduciary duty. The details haven't been shared widely, but rumors are spreading." She hesitated. "They're scared, Teresa." We paused outside the conference room. Through the glass, I could see 7 people seated around the table, their body language tense, conversations muted. "I'm a bit scared too," I admitted quietly. Patricia smiled. "That's why you'll succeed where Richard failed. He was never scared of anything, including consequences." I took a deep breath and pushed open the door. The conversations ceased immediately. 7 pairs of eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from open hostility to carefully masked fear. "Good morning," I said, moving to the head of the table, Richard's former position. I remained standing, taking a moment to make eye contact with each person. "I know you have questions. I'll answer as many as I can." Meredith Wilson, our chief marketing officer and one of Richard's closest allies, spoke first. "With all due respect, Teresa, most of us have never worked directly with you. You've been isolated in the software division. Now suddenly you're running the company?" "I'm the acting COO," I corrected gently. "The board is conducting a Search for a permanent replacement. That may or may not be me, depending on how the next few months go. And Richard? Asked Neil Patel, VP of Strategic Partnerships. We're told he was fired for breach of fiduciary duty. That's rather vague. I placed my folder on the table, considering my next words carefully. This moment would set the tone for everything that followed. Richard was terminated because he was secretly negotiating to sell our Aurora platform to Global Systems for approximately 1/3 of its market value. In exchange, he was to receive a senior position at Global and a compensation package worth roughly $15 million. The room fell silent. Whatever they had been expecting, it wasn't this. That can't be true, Meredith stammered. Richard built this company. I have the emails, the meeting transcripts, and the draft agreement, I replied calmly. The board has reviewed everything. Their decision was unanimous. I let that sink in before continuing. I understand your loyalty to Richard. He championed many of you, brought you into his inner circle. But I need to know right now, did any of you have knowledge of these negotiations with Global Systems? The tension in the room thickened. Glances were exchanged, subtle shifts in posture as each executive mentally calculated their position. Neil was the first to speak. I knew he was exploring partnership opportunities with Global. I was not aware of any personal arrangement or the specifics of the technology transfer. Others nodded in agreement, offering variations of the same. They knew pieces, but not the whole. I believe you, I said, and meant it. Richard had always compartmentalized information, keeping each team member informed only about their specific piece of the puzzle. And I'm not here to clean house or assign blame. I'm here because I care about this company, its people, and the technology we've built. I finally took my seat, opening my folder. So let's talk about what happens next. The Aurora platform remains our most valuable asset. The board has approved my recommendation to halt all partnership discussions with Global Systems and pursue an independent commercial launch. For the next hour, we discuss the path forward, restructuring priorities, realigning teams, and most importantly, bringing the Aurora platform to market ourselves instead of selling it off. Gradually, the tension in the room began to dissipate, as the executives realized I wasn't there to continue Richard's abrupt dismissals. As the meeting concluded, Meredith lingered while the others filed out. You've been planning for this role longer than just yesterday, she observed, neither accusation nor approval in her tone. I've been preparing to protect Aurora, I corrected. The role was the board's decision. She studied me with the shrewd assessment that had made her such an effective marketing officer. Richard always said you were too focused on the technology, not enough on the business. He called you an idealist. He wasn't wrong about that, I admitted. But he was wrong to think idealism and business success are mutually exclusive. She seemed to be weighing something in her mind before speaking. The partnership team has compiled market research on Aurora's potential applications. Richard never wanted to see it. He was focused only on the Global Systems deal. Would you like me to send it over? It was a small olive branch, but significant. I'd appreciate that, Meredith. Thank you. After she left, Patricia entered with a stack of papers requiring my signature and a coffee that had grown cold while I was in the meeting. How did it go? She asked. Better than expected. No one resigned on the spot. She laughed. Low bar for success. I signed the last document and leaned back in the chair. Richard's chair, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. The board meeting was the easy part. This, leading people who viewed me as an outsider for years, this is the real challenge. Patricia gathered the signed papers. You know, when Richard first became COO, he redecorated this entire office within a day. New furniture, new artwork, even had the walls repainted. Said he needed to make the space his own. I glanced around at the sleek, impersonal decor Richard had chosen, all sharp edges and cold surfaces. "What will you change?" she asked. It was a more significant question than she perhaps realized. Richard had created an executive floor designed to intimidate, to separate leadership from the teams they managed, the physical embodiment of his management philosophy. "Everything," I answered. "But not today. Today, I need to visit my team." The software division occupied the 15th through 18th floors, deliberately separated from executive leadership by 11 floors of other departments. As I stepped off the elevator onto the 17th floor where my former office was located, the familiar sounds and energy washed over me. Developers huddled around workstations, the low murmur of technical discussions, the whiteboards covered in diagrams and code snippets. My team. My home for 25 years. Heads turned as I walked through. The main development area. Word of my promotion had obviously reached them, but unlike the executive floor with its atmosphere of wary calculation, here I was met with genuine smiles and congratulatory nods. Samantha Cooper, my lead developer, spotted me and hurried over. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble. "If you're asking whether I'm the new acting COO, yes." A grin spread across her face. "I was going to say I'm disappointed to lose you as our director, but since you're now everybody's boss." She raised her voice, turning to address the room. "Hey, everyone. Teresa is here." The development floor went quiet as dozens of engineers and programmers turned toward us. "Speech," someone called out, followed by scattered applause. I hadn't prepared for this moment. In the whirlwind of the past 24 hours, I hadn't considered how I would address the team I'd led for so many years, the team I was now leaving. "I don't have a speech," I admitted. "But I do have a promise. The Aurora platform will remain under our control. We're not selling it to Global Systems or anyone else. The technology you've all worked so hard to build will be brought to market exactly as we envisioned it." The applause that followed was genuine and enthusiastic. These people knew what Aurora could do, how it could transform data management across industries. They had poured their creativity and expertise into building something revolutionary, only to hear rumors that it might be sold off before ever reaching its potential. As the noise died down, I continued. "I've recommended Samantha Cooper to take over as software division director. The board will make their decision by the end of the week, but they value my input." I glanced at Sam, whose surprise was evident. "Sorry for not discussing it with you first. Things have been moving quickly." After answering questions and accepting congratulations, I finally made my way to my old office to collect my personal belongings. It felt smaller somehow, the view from the 17th floor less impressive than I remembered. Sam followed me in, closing the door behind her. "Were you ever going to tell us about Richard's plan to sell Aurora?" she asked, her tone more curious, then accusatory. Once I had concrete evidence, yes, but I needed to be careful. Richard had allies throughout the company. Sam nodded slowly. The team suspected something was wrong when those consultants started asking detailed questions about our architecture. We were preparing our own documentation, just in case. I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "I should have known you'd be a step ahead." "Not ahead of you, apparently." She leaned against the wall, studying me. "So what happens now? You move to the executive floor, get a fancy new office, and we only see you at quarterly reviews?" The question hit at my own, unspoken concern, that in accepting this role, I was leaving behind the work and the people I cared about most. "I'm thinking of moving the executive offices," I said, the idea forming as I spoke it. "The separation between leadership and teams doesn't make sense. Never has." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Richard won't like that." "Richard isn't here anymore." The simple statement carried the weight of everything that had changed in 24 hours. "And I'm not Richard." Those words would become my mantra in the days and weeks ahead, a reminder that leadership didn't have to follow the model. Richard had established. I could chart a different course, one that valued innovation and integrity equally. As I gathered the last of my belongings, family photos, technical awards, the first server blade from Aurora's prototype, I felt a complex mixture of loss and anticipation. The comfortable familiarity of my role as software division director was behind me. Ahead lay uncharted territory. But I wasn't navigating it alone. I had allies on the board, a software team that believed in me, and even the executive team was showing signs of cautious acceptance. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, it was clear. The true depth of Richard's betrayal began to reveal itself 3 weeks after that pivotal board meeting. What I'd initially discovered, the secret negotiations with Global Systems, the personal compensation package, turned out to be merely the visible portion of a much larger iceberg. I was working late in my new office, still uncomfortable with its cold, modernist design. The executive floor emptied around 7, but I had stayed behind, reviewing the financial projections for Aurora's market launch. Something about the numbers felt off, inconsistencies I couldn't quite pinpoint. My phone buzzed with a text from Lena Winters, our newly appointed chief financial officer. The board had recruited her after terminating our previous CFO, whose complicity in Richard's schemes had become apparent during the initial investigation. Found something. Coming up now. 5 minutes later, Lena appeared in my doorway, clutching a tablet and looking troubled. "I've been reconstructing the financial models for the past 3 years," she began without preamble, taking the seat across from me. "There are discrepancies in the R&D budgeting, significant ones." She placed her tablet on my desk, turning it to face me. "The software division's budget has been systematically underreported to the board." I studied the spreadsheets she'd prepared, confusion giving way to dawning comprehension. "These numbers don't match what we were allocated." "Exactly. Your division has been receiving only about 65% of the funds the board approved. The rest was diverted elsewhere, disguised as various operational expenses." "Where did the money go?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. Lena swiped to another screen. "At least $42 million went to a subsidiary called Meridian Advanced Solutions. On paper, it's a research arm focusing on next-generation technologies. In reality..." She hesitated. "It doesn't exist," I finished for her. "It exists legally. Proper. Incorporation, tax filings, everything. But as far as I can tell, it has no employees, no physical offices, and no actual research output. Just a bank account, regular fund transfers from Meridian proper, and occasional payments to offshore consulting entities." The revelation hit me hard. For years, my team had struggled with budget constraints, delaying critical hires, working with outdated equipment, while Richard had apparently been funneling millions into a shell company. "How did no one catch this?" I asked, the question directed as much at myself as at Lena. The previous CFO signed off on everything. The external auditors saw only what they were shown. And Richard kept your division isolated from financial oversight. You reported technical progress, not financial details. I leaned back, processing this new betrayal. All those times Richard had denied my requests for additional resources, claiming budget limitations, while simultaneously diverting millions that should have gone to my team. "There's more," Lena said, her expression grim. "Based on the payment patterns, this has been going on for approximately 8 years. 8 years. The time frame hit me with particular force. 8 years ago, I had been on the verge of a promotion to the executive team. Richard, then a senior VP who'd been with the company just 4 years, had persuaded the previous CEO that I was too technical for a leadership role, that I should remain focused on product development where my skills were most valuable. I had accepted the decision with grace, throwing myself back into technical work. Meanwhile, Richard had continued his rapid ascent, eventually becoming COO 3 years ago. Now I understood why he'd been so determined to keep me away from company-wide financial oversight. Does the board know? I asked. I briefed the audit committee this afternoon. They've authorized a full forensic investigation. We spent the next 2 hours digging deeper into Lena's findings, identifying patterns and connections that had remained hidden for years. By the time we finished, it was past midnight, and the full scope of Richard's deception had begun to take shape. We need to talk to Ethan Miller, I said, referring to our general counsel. This goes beyond breach of fiduciary duty. This is systematic fraud. Lena nodded, gathering her materials. The board chair suggested a meeting first thing tomorrow, 9 a.m. in the main conference room. After she left, I remained at my desk, staring out at the city lights. The Aurora platform, the project my team had somehow managed to build despite being chronically underfunded, now represented more than just Meridian's future. It was the redemption of years of hidden sacrifice. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a number I didn't recognize. You think you've won. You've only seen the surface. R. Richard. Breaking the company's non-contact policy after his termination. I forwarded the message to Ethan, then turned off my phone. Richard's intimidation tactics had worked for years, keeping people in line, through subtle threats and displays of power. That era was over. I gathered my things and headed for the elevator, my mind racing with the implications of Lena's discoveries. As the doors slid open, I was startled to find Samantha Cooper inside, looking equally surprised to see me. "Late night?" she asked, holding the door. "Very. You too?" She nodded, shadows of exhaustion visible under her eyes. The team's been working around the clock to prepare Aurora for the security audit. The security audit. With everything else happening, I had almost forgotten about the comprehensive review we'd commissioned to ensure Aurora's architecture couldn't be compromised, a necessary step before commercial launch. "Any concerns?" I asked as the elevator descended. "Nothing major. A few encryption protocols need updating, but the core architecture is solid." She hesitated, then added, "The team's been asking about the resource allocation you mentioned. In your first week, the new development environment, additional staff." I felt a pang of guilt. In the whirlwind of discovering Richard's broader financial schemes, I had delayed addressing the immediate needs of my former team. "Tell them it's coming," I promised. "I've just discovered why resources have been so tight the past few years. That's about to change significantly." The elevator reached the lobby, and we walked together toward the parking garage. "You look troubled," Sam observed. "More than just tired." I considered how much to share. Sam had been my most trusted colleague for over a decade, but some of Lena's findings were still being verified. "Richard's betrayal runs deeper than we initially thought," I said carefully. "The board meeting tomorrow will address some financial irregularities." Sam's expression darkened. "The missing R&D funds." I stopped walking. "You knew?" "Not knew. Suspected." She ran a hand through her short hair, a gesture of frustration I'd seen countless times during difficult development cycles. About 3 years ago, I was preparing budget projections for Aurora's final phase. I requested historical allocation data to establish baselines. "And you found discrepancies," I guessed, "between what was supposedly allocated to us and what actually reached our department. About a 35% difference. When I asked finance about it, I was told it was a reporting artifact and not to worry." Her laugh was bitter. 2 weeks later, I was removed from budget planning entirely. The parking garage was deserted at this hour, our voices echoing slightly in the concrete structure. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. Sam looked away. "Richard?" Called me to his office, explained that continued questions about financial reporting would jeopardize Aurora's future. Said he'd hate to see the project canceled after so much work. She met my eyes again. It was a threat, wrapped in corporate language. I had a team to protect. I understood then how effectively Richard had isolated potential whistleblowers, using their dedication against them. Sam had stayed silent to protect her team and our project, just as I had focused on technical deliverables rather than administrative oversight. We all missed pieces of the puzzle, I said, not wanting her to shoulder any guilt. The important thing is that we're uncovering it now. As we reached our respective cars, Sam turned to me. Whatever you find tomorrow, the team should know. They've earned the truth. I nodded, knowing she was right. For too long, Meridian had operated with information siloed at the top. Transparency, sacrificed for strategic necessity, Richard's favorite phrase. That approach had allowed his deception to flourish unchecked. Full disclosure, I promised, after the board meeting. Driving home that night, I thought about how Richard's betrayal had affected not just me but the entire company. Teams struggling with artificial constraints, projects competing for resources that had been secretly diverted, careers stalled or redirected based on loyalty rather than merit. The text message he'd sent echoed in my mind. You think you've won? You've only seen the surface. He was right, but not in the way he intended. We were only beginning to understand the depth of his deception. But unlike Richard, I didn't see this revelation as a threat. It was an opportunity, a chance to rebuild Meridian on a foundation of transparency and genuine innovation, rather than manipulation and fear. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, hoping to review Lena's findings once more before the board meeting. To my surprise, the executive floor was already bustling with activity. Board members had arrived ahead of schedule, huddled in small groups with grim expressions. Patricia intercepted me as I stepped off the elevator. "They're waiting for you in the main conference room," she said, her usual composure slightly frayed. "Something new has come up." The conference room fell silent as I entered. Diane Morrison, the board chair, sat at the head of the table, flanked by Ethan Miller and Lena Winters. The other board members filled the remaining seats, while a woman I didn't recognize stood near the presentation screen. "Teresa," Diane began, "this is Karen Zhao from Digital Forensics International. We brought her in last night after receiving Lena's preliminary findings." Karen nodded in greeting. "Ms. Harmon, what did you find?" I asked, taking the only empty seat. Ethan slid a folder across the table. "It's worse than we thought. The shell company, Meridian Advanced Solutions, appears to have been funneling technology, specifically early versions of Aurora's core algorithms, to a startup called Nexus Core." I flipped open the folder, scanning the contents. "I've never heard of them." "Few people have," Karen said. "They operate almost entirely in Asia and Eastern Europe, providing data management solutions to industries with limited regulatory oversight." The implications were clear. Richard hadn't just been diverting funds. He had been stealing our technology and selling it through a separate company that wouldn't trigger competitive analysis. Nexus Core was incorporated in Singapore 5 years ago, Lena added. Its majority shareholder is a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. We're still tracing the ownership structure, but preliminary evidence suggests Richard is the beneficial owner. The room spun slightly as the full picture came into focus. Richard hadn't been planning to leave Meridian for Global Systems. That had been a recent development, perhaps a fallback plan. His primary scheme had been running in parallel to his role as COO for years, funding a competing company with Meridian's money feeding it Meridian's technology, all while maintaining the perfect cover as the trusted executive driving Meridian's strategy. "How could we have missed this?" one board member asked, his voice strained. "Because he designed our oversight systems," I said quietly, the realization dawning. As COO, Richard restructured our compliance and audit functions 3 years ago. He created a system specifically designed to hide his activities. Diane's expression was thunderous. We trusted him with the keys to the kingdom, and he's been systematically looting it while we looked the other way. The betrayal felt personal to everyone in that room. Board members who had championed Richard's rise, executives who had followed his leadership, teams that had worked under his direction, all had been unknowing participants in his deception. "What do we do now?" asked Leonard Foster, our longest-serving board member. Ethan cleared his throat. "From a legal perspective, we need to move quickly on multiple fronts. Secure our intellectual property, initiate proceedings to recover diverted funds, and consider criminal charges." "And operationally?" Diane looked at me. All eyes turned in my direction. In that moment, I understood that my role had changed again. I wasn't just the technical leader unexpectedly promoted to acting COO. I was now the person tasked with salvaging a company whose foundations had been compromised by years of systematic fraud. "We need complete transparency," I said. "The path forward suddenly clear. We tell our employees what happened, secure the Aurora platform from further theft, and rebuild our internal controls from the ground up." "The stock will take a hit when this becomes public," warned our chief investment officer. "It will," I acknowledged. "But trying to hide it will only make the eventual fallout worse." Richard betrayed not just the company, but every employee and shareholder. We honor them with the truth. As the meeting continued, discussing legal strategies and communication plans, I found myself thinking about my team, the software division that had unknowingly been at the center of Richard's schemes. They had created something valuable enough to steal, powerful enough to build a shadow company around, and they had done it despite being deliberately underfunded and isolated. Whatever came next, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Meridian's revival would be built on the strength of its people, not the manipulations of its leadership. Richard had constructed an empire of deception. We would replace it with a foundation of integrity. The true crisis wasn't Richard's betrayal or even the financial fraud. It was the culture that had enabled it, a culture I was now responsible for transforming. The memory that haunted me most wasn't the day Richard tried to dismiss me after 25 years of service. It was the night 6 months earlier when I first discovered the truth about the man I had trusted as both mentor and leader. That evening replayed in my mind as I prepared for the company-wide address scheduled for the following morning, a meeting where we would reveal the full extent of Richard's deception to all 4,200 Meridian employees. It had been a typical Tuesday in October. The development team had just completed a major milestone for Aurora, successfully integrating our new encryption protocol with the distributed database architecture. We'd ordered pizza, celebrated briefly, and gradually people had drifted home until only I remained, running final verification tests. Around 10 p.m., I decided to deliver the milestone report to Richard personally. Though it was late, I knew he often worked evening hours, and I hoped the positive news might finally convince him to approve the additional resources we desperately needed. The executive floor was eerily quiet as I stepped off the elevator. The overhead lights dimmed to their energy-saving setting. A strip of light shone from beneath Richard's office door, confirming he was still there. As I approached, I heard voices. Richard's distinctive baritone and another man speaking with a slight accent I couldn't place. I paused, not wanting to interrupt an important meeting. That's when I heard my name. "Harmon's team is making remarkable progress despite the constraints," the unfamiliar voice was saying. "The encryption module alone is worth millions. Are you sure they don't suspect anything?" "Teresa?" Richard's laugh carried clearly through the door. "She's completely focused on the technical challenges. Hand her an interesting problem and she forgets everything else: budgets, reporting structures, market considerations. That's why she's still a division director after 25 years while others have moved up." There was a pause, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "Besides," Richard continued, "she has no access to the consolidated financials. As far as she knows, her division is receiving full funding. She attributes their resource limitations to company-wide budget constraints. And the board? The other man asked. They see what I show them. Meridian's overall performance has been strong enough that no one looks too closely at the details. By the time anyone realizes what's happening with Aurora, Nexus Core will have established market dominance in our target regions. I stood frozen outside the door, the milestone report clutched in my hand, as Richard calmly discussed stealing the technology my team had spent years developing. The timeline remains the same? The visitor asked. Yes. Once Aurora reaches beta stage, we'll implement the reorganization plan. The software division will be restructured and key components sold to global systems. Meanwhile, Nexus Core launches with the core technology in markets where Meridian has no presence. And Harmon? A generous severance package and a glowing recommendation. After 25 years, she's due for retirement anyway. The casual dismissal of my entire career, reduced to a checkbox in Richard's exit strategy, sent a wave of cold fury through me. I had devoted my professional life to Meridian, declined offers from competitors, worked weekends and holidays to meet critical deadlines. And Richard had been systematically undermining everything we built, planning to discard me once I'd served my purpose. In that moment, I had two choices: confront him immediately with nothing but overheard snippets of conversation, or retreat, gather evidence, and build an irrefutable case. I chose the latter. The milestone report went undelivered as I silently backed away from Richard's door and returned to the elevator. My mind raced with implications, connecting dots that had previously seemed unrelated. The mysterious consultants, who had asked detailed questions about Aurora's architecture, the sudden reorganization of the finance department that removed our longtime budget coordinator, Richard's increasing interest in technical details he had previously dismissed as too in the weeds. By the time I reached my car in the deserted parking garage, shock had given way to determination. Richard might be the shrewd businessman with political connections throughout the company, but I understood Aurora in ways he never could. That knowledge would become my weapon. Now, 6 months later, I sat in Richard's former office, preparing to address the company about his betrayal. The evidence we had accumulated was damning. Financial records showing the diverted funds, technical documentation proving that Nexus Core's products were built on stolen Meridian technology, emails detailing the scheme to mislead the board and eventually dismantle the software division. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Meredith Wilson, our chief marketing officer, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Do you have a minute, Teresa?" I gestured for her to enter. Though initially one of Richard's strongest allies among the executive team, Meredith had proven remarkably adaptable to the new reality, offering valuable insights during our crisis planning. "I've been thinking about tomorrow's announcement," she said, taking a seat across from me. "The messaging is tricky. We need to be transparent without destroying confidence in the company." "Agreed. What's your recommendation?" She placed a tablet on my desk, displaying a presentation deck. "I've drafted an approach that focuses on resilience and renewal. We acknowledge the breach of trust, but emphasize the strength of the technology and the teams that built it." As I swiped through her slides, I was impressed by the thoughtful approach. Rather than minimizing Richard's actions, she had framed them as a betrayal overcome through the integrity of Meridian's people, particularly the software division that had created Aurora despite deliberate underfunding. "This is good, Meredith. Really good." She seemed relieved. "There's something else." She hesitated, then continued. "I need to show you something that might help explain why Richard targeted you specifically." From her portfolio, she extracted a folder containing what appeared to be performance evaluations, mine, dating back several years. Each one contained Richard's assessments, which were consistently negative regarding my leadership potential while acknowledging my technical contributions. "Where did you get these?" I asked, paging through assessments I had never been shown. Richard kept separate personnel files for executive committee members and potential candidates. These were never shared with HR. They were his private evaluations, meant for his eyes only. The comments were revealing. Harmon lacks strategic vision. Too focused on technical elegance at the expense of market considerations. Not executive material, best kept in her current role. And most damning of all, from an evaluation dated shortly after I had questioned a sudden budget reallocation. Becoming problematic. Shows too much interest in financial details outside her purview. Consider accelerating succession planning for software division leadership. Why are you showing me these now? I asked, closing the folder. Meredith met my gaze directly. Because I wrote some of them. Not these specific comments, but similar assessments of other leaders Richard wanted to sideline. He would give me talking points, weaknesses to emphasize, strengths to minimize. I crafted narratives that served his agenda. The admission clearly cost her. Meredith had built her career on strategic communication, and here she was confessing to using those skills to undermine colleagues at Richard's direction. It wasn't just you, she continued. Anyone Richard viewed as a potential threat was systematically diminished in these private evaluations. He created paper trails to justify decisions he'd already made. And the executive committee accepted these assessments without question? Richard was persuasive and successful. The company's overall performance gave him credibility. Who would question his judgment when quarterly results consistently exceeded expectations? I understood then why Richard had been so confident in his ability to dismiss me without resistance. He had spent years constructing a narrative of my limitations, ensuring that any protest I might make would be viewed as the desperate flailing of a technical specialist unable to see the bigger picture. "Thank you for showing me this," I said, returning the folder. "There's more where these came from. Files on most senior directors, particularly those with strong technical backgrounds or financial acumen. People who might have spotted what he was doing." "We'll need those for the investigation," I said. "And Meredith. I appreciate your honesty." After she left, I returned to my preparations with a clearer understanding of what we were up against. Richard hadn't just been a corrupt executive. He had been a master manipulator who had systematically isolated potential whistleblowers while building a defensive narrative to protect himself. My phone buzzed with a text from Lena. "Nexus Core attempting major transaction. Call me ASAP." I dialed immediately. "They're trying to sell their core technology, the stolen Aurora components, to Tech Fusion for $340 million, she said without preamble. "Our attorneys are filing for an emergency injunction, but the deal could close within 24 hours. The news hit hard. If Nexus Core successfully sold our technology before we could legally establish ownership, recovering it would become exponentially more difficult." "Where is this happening?" I asked. "Singapore. The deal's being fast-tracked, obviously in response to Richard's termination." "Who's handling our legal response?" "Ethan's on it, but he says our chances depend on how quickly we can prove the technology originated at Meridian. He needs definitive technical documentation showing Aurora's development timeline." "I'll have Sam compile everything immediately," I promised. "And Lena, keep this quiet for now. We don't want to panic the company before tomorrow's announcement." The next call was to Samantha Cooper, who answered despite the late hour. "I need comprehensive documentation of Aurora's development history," I explained. "Everything. Design documents, milestone reports, code repositories, all with verifiable timestamps." "This is about Nexus Core, isn't it?" Sam's tone was grim. "The team found pieces of our code in their Asia-Pacific deployment. It's definitely Aurora, just stripped of identifying markers." "You knew?" "We discovered it yesterday. We've been compiling evidence before bringing it to you. Wanted to be absolutely certain." Once again, I was reminded of how Richard's Compartmentalized management style continued to affect us, with teams hesitant to share information until they had complete certainty. Sam, from now on, I need to know about concerns immediately, even if they're not fully verified. We can't afford to work in silos anymore. Understood. We'll have the documentation to legal within 2 hours. As I ended the call, a new message appeared on my screen. An email from an address I didn't recognize, with no subject line. The content was a single line of text. Aurora dies with you. Check your car. A chill ran through me. I forwarded the email to security, then moved to the window overlooking the parking garage. From 30 floors up, I couldn't see details, but flashing lights were visible near the executive parking area. Police cruisers and what appeared to be a bomb squad vehicle. My phone rang. Security Chief Wilson. Ms. Harmon, are you still in the building? Yes, I'm in my office. What's happening? Ma'am, we've found an explosive device attached to your vehicle. Police are handling it now, but I need you to remain where you are. We're implementing building security protocols and sending officers to your location. The clinical way he delivered this information made it seem almost routine, but the implications were staggering. This wasn't just corporate espionage or financial fraud anymore. Richard, or someone working for him, had escalated to attempted murder. As security officers arrived to secure my office, I found myself staring at the city lights beyond the window, thinking about how completely I had underestimated what Richard was capable of. I had approached his betrayal as a corporate matter, a battle of evidence and procedure. He apparently saw it as a war with no limits. My phone buzzed again, Diane Morrison calling for an emergency update. As I explained the situation, her voice remained steady, but I could hear the underlying shock. The company-wide meeting is postponed, she decided. Security takes priority. We'll arrange protection for you and other key executives. This changes everything, Teresa. And it did. What had begun as one woman's discovery of her boss's corrupt dealings had escalated into something far darker. The coming days would test not just my leadership abilities, but my courage in the face of explicit threats. Richard's dismissive words from our final confrontation echoed in my mind. You'll never survive this. You're too soft for the corporate world. Always have been. He had been wrong about many things. I hoped desperately he was wrong about this too. The discovery of an explosive device attached to my car changed everything. What had been a corporate power struggle transformed overnight into a criminal investigation with me at its center. For the next 48 hours, I operated from a secure hotel suite, arranged by Meridian's security team, my movements restricted, my communications monitored. The morning after the bomb was discovered, Diane Morrison convened an emergency board, meeting via secure video conference. I watched the board members' faces on my laptop screen, their expressions a mixture of shock, anger, and determination. The FBI has taken over the investigation, Diane informed the group. They're treating this as an attempted corporate assassination, potentially linked to economic espionage given the Aurora Technologies' classified applications. The Aurora platform, with its revolutionary approach to secure data management, had attracted interest from several government agencies. Its potential military and intelligence applications made the theft more than just corporate crime. It touched on national security. What's the status of the Nexus Core deal? Leonard Foster asked. Our legal team secured a temporary injunction, Ethan Miller reported. The Singapore Commercial Court has frozen the transaction for 72 hours while we present evidence of intellectual property theft. And Richard? Another board member inquired. Still no sign of him, Diane replied. His last known location was a private airfield outside Toronto 2 days ago. International law enforcement has been alerted. The realization that Richard had fled the country only underscored the gravity of the situation. This wasn't a disgruntled executive seeking revenge. This was a calculated criminal covering his tracks. What's our strategy moving forward? Diane asked, turning her attention to me. Despite the chaos of the past 2 days, I had been formulating a plan, one that would not only protect Meridian, but potentially transform the company in ways Richard had never anticipated. We need to approach this on 3 fronts simultaneously. I began, sharing my screen to display the framework I'd developed. First, security, protecting our people, our facilities, and our intellectual property from further attacks. Second, legal, aggressively pursuing both criminal charges against Richard and civil claims against Nexus Corp. And third, operational, accelerating Aurora's market readiness while restructuring the company to prevent similar vulnerabilities in the future. The board members listened intently as I outlined specific actions for each area. Rather than retreating in the face of Richard's attacks, we would push forward more aggressively than ever. Our greatest asset right now is the truth, I concluded. Richard built his scheme on secrecy and isolation. We'll counter with radical transparency, starting with our own employees. The company-wide meeting, postponed after the bomb discovery, was rescheduled for the following day with enhanced security measures. Rather than gathering everyone in the auditorium as originally planned, we would use a secure broadcast system to address employees simultaneously at all locations. After the board meeting concluded, I received a call from Samantha Cooper. "The team's been working around the clock," she reported. "We've documented over 200 instances where Aurora's proprietary code appears in Nexus Corp products. The timestamps and development history are irrefutable." "That's exactly what we need," I said. "How soon can you compile everything for legal?" "It's already done. Ethan's team received the full package an hour ago. They're incorporating it into the Singapore court filing as we speak." Sam hesitated, then added, "There's something else. The team discovered a backdoor in Aurora's authentication module, code that doesn't match our development standards. It appears to have been inserted approximately 4 months ago." My blood ran cold. A security vulnerability? Potentially, it would allow someone with the right access credentials to bypass security protocols and extract data undetected. We've removed it and patched the system, but it means Richard was planning not just to steal our technology, but to compromise it after deployment, I finished. He wanted to maintain access even after selling it to legitimate customers. Exactly. And Teresa. The backdoor code matches snippets we found in Nexus Corp's products. This isn't just theft. It's sabotage. The discovery added another dimension to Richard's betrayal. He hadn't simply been siphoning resources and stealing technology. He had been deliberately compromising Meridian's flagship product, potentially endangering our future customers' security. "Have you documented this thoroughly?" I asked. "Yes. Complete code comparisons, timestamp verification, everything. It's bulletproof." "Send it directly to Special Agent Morris at the FBI. Copy Ethan so he's aware, but this needs to go to federal investigators immediately." After ending the call, I sat back in my hotel room chair, processing the implications. Richard's scheme was more elaborate and more dangerous than we had initially understood. The question now was how to move forward without allowing his actions to define Meridian's future. A knock at my door signaled the arrival of Meredith Wilson and Lena Winters. After security verified their identities, they joined me in the suite's living area, spreading documents across the coffee table. "We've finalized the communication strategy," Meredith began. "A phased approach, starting with tomorrow's all-hands meeting, followed by targeted outreach to key customers, partners, and investors." "The market will react strongly," Lena warned. "Our stock will take a significant hit initially, but our financial models show we can weather the storm if we accelerate Aurora's commercial release." "Can we do that safely?" I asked. "Given what Sam just found?" I briefed them on the backdoor discovery, watching their expressions shift from shock to grim determination. "This actually strengthens our position," Meredith noted after a moment's reflection. "It transforms the narrative from corporate fraud to something much more significant, protecting national infrastructure from deliberate sabotage. And it justifies an accelerated refinancing strategy, Lena added. I've been developing contingency options. With this new information, we can approach specific institutional investors who specialize in cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. Their rapid adjustment to new information impressed me. Despite being selected initially by Richard, both women had proven themselves adaptable and forward-thinking in crisis. There's another angle we should consider, Meredith said, pulling a folder from her briefcase. Richard's public image. He's been cultivating relationships with business publications, industry analysts, and influencers for years. He'll use those connections to spin this situation. She was right. Richard had carefully built his reputation as an innovative leader, regularly featured in business magazines and speaking at prestigious conferences. He had connections throughout the industry that might be willing to accept his version of events. What do you suggest? I asked. Preemptive transparency. We release a comprehensive statement detailing his actions, backed by irrefutable evidence. We include the attempted murder. That changes the story from a business dispute to a criminal manhunt. Won't that hurt the company's reputation even more? Lena asked, concerned. Admitting our COO was engaged in espionage and attempted murder? Temporarily, yes, Meredith acknowledged. But if we control the narrative, emphasizing how the company uncovered and addressed the threat, it becomes a story of corporate responsibility and resilience. As they continued discussing communication strategies, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Cardinal, room 412, 8 p.m. Come alone. Critical information about Richard. VR. The initials gave me pause. Victoria. Reynolds had been Richard's executive assistant for nearly a decade before abruptly resigning 3 months ago. Her departure had seemed odd at the time. No farewell gathering, no transition period, just an announcement that she had left for personal reasons. I showed the message to the security officer stationed outside my suite. Within minutes, he had consulted with his team and the FBI. It could be a trap, he warned, but if it's legitimate, Ms. Reynolds might have valuable information. We can secure the location, added Special Agent Morris, who had joined the discussion via phone. If you're willing to take the risk, we'll ensure your safety. The decision wasn't easy. Victoria had been fiercely loyal to Richard, often acting as his gatekeeper and enforcer. If she had information to share now, it could be transformative. Or it could be another attempt to silence me. I'll go, I decided, but with full security protocols in place. The Cardinal was a boutique hotel in the city's financial district, discreet and exclusive. By 7:30 p.m., FBI agents had secured the building, sweeping room 412 and positioning personnel throughout the hotel. I arrived through a service entrance, escorted by 2 plainclothes agents posing as business associates. Victoria was waiting in the room, looking very different from the polished executive assistant I remembered. Her designer suits had been replaced with jeans and a simple blouse, her usually immaculate hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. "Thank you for coming," she said, tension evident in her voice. "I wasn't sure you would trust me." "I'm not sure." "I do," I replied honestly, "but I'm willing to listen." She gestured to a manila envelope on the coffee table. "Everything's in there. Financial records, communication logs, meeting notes, 3 years of documentation I kept as insurance." "Insurance against what?" "Against Richard," she said simply. "I knew what he was doing was wrong. I didn't know how wrong until recently." I opened the envelope, paging through its contents. Bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts. Emails discussing technology transfers to Nexus Core. Calendar entries for meetings with individuals identified only by initials. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" I asked, looking up from the documents. Victoria's expression hardened. Because Richard made it very clear what happens to people who cross him. 3 months ago, I questioned a transaction, a particularly large transfer to Meridian Advanced Solutions. The next day, my apartment was broken into. Nothing was taken, but my computer was left open to a file containing personal photos that could damage my reputation. He threatened you. Without ever saying a word, just let me know. He could destroy me anytime he chose. She leaned forward. When I heard about the bomb in your car, I realized he'd gone beyond threats. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The documentation Victoria provided filled crucial gaps in our understanding of Richard's operation. Most significantly, it revealed connections to other executives at Meridian who had assisted him. Some knowingly, others manipulated through carefully constructed falsehoods. There's one more thing, Victoria said as our meeting concluded. Richard has a contingency plan. If Nexus Core can't sell the technology, he intends to release it as open-source code, attributed to a fictional developer. Once it's public, Meridian loses its proprietary advantage, and any future legal claims become nearly impossible to enforce. When? I asked, alarmed. The plan triggers automatically if he doesn't provide a weekly authentication code to a server in Estonia. The next deadline is tomorrow at midnight, CET. I immediately contacted Special Agent Morris, who was monitoring our conversation from an adjacent room. Within minutes, he had initiated contact with Estonian authorities and cybersecurity specialists. The next morning, back in my secured hotel suite, I prepared for the company-wide address with a clearer picture of what we were facing. Richard's betrayal was more extensive than we had imagined, but now we had comprehensive evidence and a specific threat to counter. The strategic response was taking shape: protect the technology from both theft and sabotage, pursue Richard and his accomplices through legal channels, restructure the company to eliminate the vulnerabilities he had created, and transform Meridian's culture from one of isolated fiefdoms to collaborative transparency. As I reviewed my notes for the address, I received confirmation that the Estonian authorities had located the server Victoria had identified. With less than 16 hours remaining before Richard's dead man's switch activated, our technical team was working with international law enforcement to neutralize the threat. Richard had spent years meticulously building his shadow operation, using Meridian's resources to fund a competing company while systematically undermining anyone who might expose him. He had created a perfect trap and had been moments away from triggering it when his dismissal accelerated his timeline. What he hadn't counted on was the resilience and determination of the people he had manipulated and dismissed. People like me, like Sam's development team, like Victoria Reynolds. People whose loyalty he had taken for granted while betraying the company we had helped build. His words from our final confrontation still echoed. "You'll never survive this. You're too soft for the corporate world. Always have been." He had mistaken deliberate focus for weakness, ethical boundaries for limitations. As I prepared to address Meridian's employees, I knew that the coming weeks would be challenging beyond anything in my 25-year career. But I also knew we were stronger than Richard had ever given us credit for. The company he had tried to hollow out and discard was about to demonstrate a resilience he had never imagined possible. No one builds a defense against corporate sabotage alone. In the days following the discovery of the bomb and Victoria Reynolds' revelations, I learned that the strength of Meridian lay not in its technologies or financial resources, but in its people, individuals who had been working quietly, in their own spheres, gathering information and preparing for the moment when the truth about Richard would finally emerge. The company-wide address had been a turning point. Rather than attempting to minimize Richard's actions or spin a sanitized version of events, we had shared the full, unvarnished truth. Our former COO had systematically stolen technology, diverted funds, and ultimately resorted to violence when his schemes were exposed. The reaction from employees had been stunned silence followed by an outpouring of support and information. Dozens came forward with their own pieces of the puzzle. Instances where Richard had blocked promising initiatives, redirected resources, or isolated team members who asked too many questions. 3 days after the address, I convened a special task force in a secure conference room at Meridian's secondary office facility. The group represented a cross-section of the company. Samantha Cooper from software development, Lena Winters from finance, Meredith Wilson from marketing, Victoria Reynolds with her insider knowledge of Richard's operations, plus key team members from legal, security, and human resources. The Estonian server has been neutralized, reported Serena Patel, our newly appointed Chief Information Security Officer. Richard's dead man switch won't be triggered, but we've uncovered 3 additional backup mechanisms. How sophisticated are they? I asked. Very. Serena displayed a network diagram on the main screen. These aren't amateur systems. He employed top-tier cybersecurity experts, likely without telling them the true purpose of their work. Can we disable them? We're working on it. The challenge is doing so without alerting Richard. Each system is designed to notify him if it's compromised. This cat-and-mouse game with Richard's digital fail-safes was just one front in our multifaceted battle. While Serena's team worked to neutralize the technical threats, others focused on different aspects of our defense and recovery strategy. The Singapore court has extended our injunction, Ethan Miller reported. Nexus Corp's assets remain frozen while the case proceeds. Their CEO is now distancing himself from Richard, claiming he was misled about the origins of the technology. We've identified 23 employees who were directly complicit in Richard's schemes, added Helena Duarte from Human Resources. 8 senior managers and 15 mid-level staff across various departments. All have been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. As concerning as those numbers were, they represented less than 1% of Meridian's workforce. The vast majority of employees had been unwitting victims of Richard's manipulation, rather than willing participants. What's the status of the Aurora platform? I asked, turning to Sam. We've removed all compromised code and implemented enhanced security protocols, she replied. The good news is that Richard never gained access to the core architecture, only specific modules. The platform remains viable and on schedule for commercial release. Victoria, who had been quietly taking notes, spoke up. Richard will have contingency plans we haven't discovered yet. His pattern was always to create multiple fallback options. What would be his priority now? I asked. With his initial plans disrupted, what's his most likely next move? Victoria considered the question carefully. Richard operates from a position of perceived superiority. Being outwitted publicly would damage his self-image. He'll want to regain control of the narrative and demonstrate that he's still ahead of us. So we should expect a public relations offensive, Meredith suggested. He'll try to present himself as the victim, probably claim that Meridian is attempting to suppress his innovations at Nexus Corp. More than that, Victoria cautioned. He'll want to inflict damage, to prove he still has power. Financial markets, customer relationships, strategic partnerships. He knows Meridian's vulnerabilities intimately. The assessment was sobering. Richard had spent years as Meridian's COO, with access to every aspect of the company's operations. He knew our weaknesses, our dependencies, our critical relationships. We need to shore up every potential vulnerability, I decided. Each of you should identify the highest risk areas in your domains and implement protective measures immediately. As the meeting continued, I was struck by the transformation in these colleagues. Many had worked under Richard's shadow for years, their initiatives blocked, their concerns dismissed. Now, freed from his influence, they were displaying remarkable creativity and determination. Lena presented a comprehensive financial restructuring plan that would insulate Meridian's core operations from market volatility. Meredith outlined a proactive communication strategy targeting key stakeholders. Sam proposed an accelerated development cycle that would bring Aurora to market ahead of schedule, establishing our technological leadership before Richard could react. Near the end of the session, an unexpected visitor arrived, FBI Special Agent Morris, accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize. "Ms. Harmon," Agent Morris said after being admitted to the room. "This is Special Agent Diana Wong from our Cybercrime Division. We have information you need to hear immediately." Agent Wong wasted no time on preliminaries. "We've traced financial transactions linking Nexus Core to a state-sponsored technology acquisition program. Richard Blackwell isn't just selling stolen intellectual property. He's engaged in economic espionage." The revelation stunned the room into silence. What we had been treating as corporate malfeasance had escalated to national security concerns. "We have reason to believe Mr. Blackwell is currently in Macau," Agent Wong continued. "Local authorities are cooperating with our investigation, but jurisdiction is complicated." "What does this mean for Meridian?" I asked. "It means your company is now part of a multinational counterintelligence operation," she replied. "The Aurora platform's applications in secure data management make it a technology of significant interest to foreign intelligence services." The stakes had risen dramatically. Richard wasn't simply a corporate criminal seeking personal enrichment. He was a player in a much larger geopolitical game. After the FBI agents departed, our task force regrouped to integrate this new information into our strategy. The atmosphere had shifted from determined to grave. "If state actors are involved," Serena noted, "we need to assume our systems are under sophisticated attack right now." "And our legal remedies become more complex," Ethan added. "International courts move slowly, especially when sovereign immunity might be invoked." The path forward seemed suddenly more precarious, the obstacles more formidable. I could see uncertainty creeping into the expressions around the table. Then Sam spoke up, her voice steady. "We built Aurora to withstand exactly these kinds of threats. It was designed from the ground up to protect sensitive data against advanced persistent threats. We just need to apply those same principles to protecting Meridian itself." Her simple statement cut through the growing anxiety. She was right. The same innovative thinking that had created Aurora could be our salvation now. "Sam's right," I affirmed. "We have everything we need to overcome this. The technology, the expertise, and most importantly, the people." The meeting adjourned with clear action items for each team. As the room emptied, Victoria remained behind, seemingly hesitant to speak. "There's something else," she said once we were alone. "Something I haven't shared with the FBI yet." From her bag, she withdrew a small leather-bound notebook. Richard's personal journal. He kept it locked in a hidden safe in his lake house. I acquired it the week after he threatened me. The journal contained Richard's handwritten notes spanning the past 5 years, unfiltered thoughts on his schemes, his contempt for the board, his plans for Meridian's technologies. Most disturbing were his assessments of key personnel, including detailed notes on how to manipulate or neutralize anyone he considered a potential threat. The entry about me was particularly revealing. "Teresa Harmon remains my most significant challenge. Her technical expertise makes her valuable, but her integrity makes her dangerous. She still believes in building technology for its own sake, rather than as a means to power. Such naivety would be amusing if it weren't so potentially problematic. I've successfully isolated her within the software division, but her influence with the development team continues to grow. If she ever gained broader organizational awareness, she could unravel everything. Accelerating her removal has become a priority." Reading Richard's cold calculation about my removal sent a chill through me. But it also confirmed what I had long suspected. He had seen my focus on technology as a weakness, rather than recognizing it as the source of Meridian's true value. "Why did you wait to share this?" I asked Victoria. "Because some of these pages implicate people still at Meridian, people who aren't on our list of known collaborators. I needed to be certain of your commitment to fairness before putting more careers at risk. It was a reasonable concern. In the chaos following Richard's exposure, there had been calls for sweeping dismissals of anyone associated with his leadership team. I had insisted on thorough investigation rather than presumptions of guilt. We'll handle this carefully, I promised. Evidence matters, but so does context. Richard was a master manipulator. Many people followed his directives without understanding the bigger picture. Victoria nodded, seemingly relieved. That's why I decided to trust you. Richard never understood that compassion isn't weakness. He saw only what he could use or control. The journal provided invaluable insights into Richard's thinking and operations. More importantly, it revealed a network of external partners, bankers, consultants, industry analysts, who had facilitated his schemes, often unwittingly. Each represented a potential vulnerability that needed to be addressed. Over the next 2 days, our task force worked relentlessly to implement protective measures across Meridian's operations. Security protocols were enhanced, financial controls tightened, communication channels secured. The Aurora platform underwent additional hardening against potential exploits. Throughout this intense period, I was struck by the emergence of natural leaders from unexpected places within the organization. A junior analyst in finance developed an innovative monitoring system to detect unusual transaction patterns. A customer support manager created a proactive outreach program that strengthened key client relationships. A facilities coordinator reorganized physical security measures to protect our development labs. These individuals had always possessed these capabilities, but under Richard's leadership, initiative had been discouraged, creativity contained. Now, faced with an existential threat to the company, they stepped forward, offering solutions that no centralized leadership team could have developed alone. By the end of the week, Meridian had transformed from a vulnerable target into a fortified enterprise. Our defenses weren't perfect. No security system ever is, but we had dramatically reduced our exposure to Richard's potential attacks. More importantly, we had tapped into the collective intelligence and commitment of Meridian's people. Richard had built his power through division and isolation. Our strength came from collaboration and shared purpose. The support network that emerged in this crisis wasn't created overnight. It had always existed beneath the surface. Connections between teams, informal information sharing, mutual respect among colleagues. Richard had worked systematically to suppress these natural alliances, recognizing them as threats to his control. Now, those same connections formed the foundation of Meridian's resilience. As the FBI and international authorities closed in on Richard's location, we prepared for his inevitable counterattack, knowing that we faced it not as isolated individuals, but as a united company. The words Richard had spoken during our final confrontation, "You'll never survive this. You're too soft for the corporate world," had been intended as a dismissal. Instead, they had become a catalyst for proving exactly what kind of strength was truly valuable in building a sustainable enterprise. The corporate world didn't need more leaders like Richard, operating through fear and manipulation. It needed people who understood that genuine power comes from empowering others, creating environments where innovation thrives and integrity is rewarded. As our task force convened for its final planning session before the weekend, I shared a simple message. Richard underestimated all of us. He mistook technical focus for naivety, ethical boundaries for weakness, collaborative leadership for indecision. That was his fundamental error, and it will be his downfall. 10 days after the discovery of the bomb in my car, the moment we had been preparing for arrived unexpectedly. I was reviewing security protocols with Serena Patel when Patricia burst into the conference room, her usual composure shattered. "He's here," she said breathlessly. "Richard is in the building." My first thought was disbelief. Richard Blackwell, the subject of an international manhunt, Walking into Meridian's headquarters seemed impossible. "Are you certain?" I asked, already reaching for my phone to alert security. "Absolutely." He just walked through the main entrance, accompanied by two men in suits. "He's heading for the executive elevator." Serena was already contacting the security team through her earpiece, initiating lockdown protocols, all access to executive floors restricted. My mind raced through possibilities. Was this a desperate gambit, a calculated power move, or something else entirely? "Where are the FBI agents?" I asked. "Agent Morris left for the field office an hour ago," Patricia replied. "The protective detail is still on site, but they're assigned to you, not the building entrances." Indeed, two agents were stationed outside our conference room, visible through the glass wall. They were now receiving urgent communications, their expressions shifting from professional detachment to focused alert. One of them entered the room. "Ms. Harmon, we've been informed that Richard Blackwell has entered the premises. We need to move you to a secure location immediately." "No," I said, the decision crystallizing instantly. "If Richard is here, there's a reason. I need to understand what he's doing." "Ma'am, with all due respect, this man attempted to have you killed. Your safety is our priority." "And the safety of everyone in this building is mine," I countered. "Richard knows this facility intimately. If he's planning something, moving me to a secure location won't stop him. We need to confront this directly." The agent looked unhappy, but didn't argue further. "We'll need additional personnel, and you'll wear a vest." Within minutes, I was encased in a bulletproof vest beneath my suit jacket, surrounded by 4 agents and Meridian's head of security. Serena had deployed her team throughout the building, while Ethan Miller contacted local law enforcement for backup. "The surveillance system shows Blackwell and 2 men on the 30th floor," reported the security chief. "They bypassed the elevator, restrictions using an executive override code that should have been deactivated." "Where exactly?" I asked. "Your office, ma'am. They're waiting in your office." Of course. Richard would consider it a symbolic victory to confront me in the space that had once been his. The office I had deliberately not redecorated as a reminder of what we were working to change. "Patch me through to the office phone," I instructed. "Patricia, let's find out what he wants before we go up there." She dialed the extension, putting it on speaker. The phone rang 3 times before being answered. "Teresa." Richard's smooth voice filled the room, showing no trace of stress despite his fugitive status. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "You've gone to extraordinary lengths for this meeting," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Breaking into the building, violating international law by returning to the country. It must be important." "Oh, it is." His chuckle sent a chill through the room. "And it's not breaking in when you have valid credentials. Your security team should be more thorough about deactivating access." A pointed look at our security chief, who appeared mortified. Another vulnerability Richard had exploited. "What? Do you want, Richard?" "A conversation, face to face. No FBI, no security teams. Just you and me, resolving this situation like the professionals we are." "The situation where you stole company technology, diverted millions in funds, and tried to have me killed. That situation?" "Such dramatic characterizations," Richard sighed. "I thought you were more rational than that, but this is exactly why we need to talk privately. Too many misunderstandings have occurred." The agents were signaling urgently, one making a throat-cutting gesture suggesting I end the call. Another was writing on a notepad. Stalling for time. They were right. Every minute we kept Richard talking was another minute for law enforcement. To surround the building, another minute for Serena's team to secure vital systems against whatever he might be planning. "I'm open to a meeting," I said, ignoring the agent's concerned expressions. "But I need assurances. Who are the men with you?" "Merely associates ensuring my safety. They're unarmed and pose no threat. unlike the small army you've no doubt assembled. And why should I trust your assurances after a bomb was found attached to my car? Richard laughed, the sound unnervingly genuine. Oh, Teresa, always so direct. That unfortunate incident was an unauthorized initiative by an overzealous third party. Not my style at all. I prefer more elegant solutions. Such as selling our technology to foreign governments? A pause, the first crack in his composed facade. You've been busy, but you're only seeing pieces of a much larger picture. Come upstairs alone, and I'll explain everything. You have my word that no harm will come to you. The word of a man who had betrayed the company he was entrusted to lead, who had systematically undermined and planned to discard a colleague of 25 years, who had fled the country to escape justice. Yet something in his tone gave me pause. Richard sounded not just confident but almost relaxed, as if he held cards we hadn't yet seen. 15 minutes, I said. Then the FBI will come up regardless of any agreement. Fair enough. The elevator is waiting for you. As I ended the call, the room erupted in protests. This is completely inadvisable, the lead agent insisted. He could be planning anything. We don't even know if those men with him are actually unarmed, added the security chief. I understand the concerns, I acknowledged. But Richard didn't come here for violence. He's too calculating for that. He wants something else, and I need to find out what. Ethan Miller, who had joined us partway through the call, offered a practical compromise. We place agents on the floor immediately below. The moment anything seems off, they can be in the office within seconds. And you wear a concealed transmitter, Serena added. We monitor everything in real time. With these precautions in place, plus the bulletproof vest already making me uncomfortably warm, I headed for the executive elevator. The ride to the 30th floor seemed both interminably long and far too quick. As the doors slid open, I was struck by the eerie quiet of the executive floor. Normally bustling with activity, it had been evacuated as part of our security protocol. My footsteps echoed in the empty corridor as I approached my office. The door was open. Richard sat behind my desk, his old desk, looking remarkably composed. For a man facing multiple federal charges, he wore one of his trademark custom suits, his posture relaxed, almost regal. Flanking him were two men I didn't recognize, both in dark suits, standing with the alert stillness of trained security personnel. Teresa. Richard greeted me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Please, close the door and take a seat. I remained standing just inside the doorway. I prefer to keep it open. As you wish. He gestured dismissively. Though privacy would better serve our discussion. What discussion is that exactly? The one where you explain attempting to steal Aurora, or the one where you justify placing a bomb in my car? Richard's expression hardened slightly. I've already addressed the unfortunate incident with your vehicle, a regrettable action by an associate acting without authorization. As for Aurora, he leaned forward. That's precisely what we need to discuss. There are aspects of that technology you don't fully understand. I led its development. For 3 years, I countered. I understand it better than anyone. You understand its technical capabilities. What you don't grasp are its implications. Geopolitical, economic, strategic. Richard's tone shifted, becoming almost professorial. Aurora isn't just a data management platform. It's a paradigm shift in information control. Do you truly believe Meridian is equipped to handle that responsibility? The question caught me off guard. It wasn't the defensive justification I had expected, but something more nuanced and potentially more dangerous. We built it, I replied. We understand its applications and limitations. Who better to guide its deployment? Richard laughed softly. Oh, Teresa. still viewing technology as a neutral tool rather than a weapon of economic warfare. This is exactly why I had to take matters into my own hands. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city. The world is changing faster than Meridian can adapt. Nation-states, not corporations, will control the next generation of technology development. I simply recognized this reality before the board did. By stealing our intellectual property and selling it to the highest bidder. By ensuring Aurora reached the entities best positioned to maximize its potential, he corrected smoothly. The compensation was merely recognition of my contribution to facilitating that transition. His casual reframing of corporate theft as strategic vision was breathtaking in its audacity. Yet I could see how such reasoning might have justified his actions in his own mind. Richard had always excelled at constructing narratives that positioned himself as the visionary while dismissing others as lacking strategic understanding. And the diverted funds? I pressed. The shell company? The backdoor you installed in Aurora's security protocols? Were those also for the greater good? A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. Necessary measures to achieve the optimal outcome. The board's short-sightedness required creative solutions. He returned to the desk, opening a slim leather portfolio. But that's not why I'm here. I'm offering you a chance to correct your course before irreparable damage is done. From the portfolio, he extracted a document and slid it across the desk. A binding term sheet. Nexus Corps will license Aurora back to Meridian for specific commercial applications, while retaining rights for governmental and defense sector deployment. Meridian receives 15% of all government contract revenue in perpetuity. You personally receive a consulting package worth $30 million over 5 years. I stared at the document, momentarily speechless. Richard wasn't here to threaten or intimidate. He was here to negotiate. He still believed he could win, could transform his criminal actions into a legitimate business arrangement. You're offering me a bribe to legitimize your theft, I said finally. I'm offering you a partnership that acknowledges reality, he countered. The FBI investigation can be managed. The narrative reframed from theft to strategic reorganization. Your reputation enhanced rather than destroyed in the coming legal battles. My reputation? Come now, Teresa. Do you think you'll emerge unscathed from this situation? The board will eventually question how Aurora's security was compromised under your technical leadership. The market will punish Meridian severely once the full extent of the technology transfer becomes public. Your career will end in disgrace rather than triumph. He was attempting to leverage the same tactics that had worked throughout his career, creating doubt, implying vulnerability, offering a seemingly gracious solution to a problem he himself had manufactured. In the past, such approaches had often succeeded. Richard had built his career on understanding others' insecurities and exploiting them masterfully. But there was something he had failed to account for. The woman standing before him was not the same division director he had dismissed 3 weeks ago. You still don't understand what's happening here, do you, Richard? I said quietly. Enlighten me. His tone was indulgent, patronizing. You're not offering me a partnership. You're not even negotiating from a position of strength. You're a fugitive in a building surrounded by federal agents, attempting to salvage something from the complete collapse of your schemes. His confident smile faltered slightly. The authorities can be managed. They always can. With the right approach. The Estonian server has been neutralized, I interrupted. So have your backup systems in Singapore and Belarus. Nexus Corps' assets are frozen pending criminal investigation. And as of this morning, your various shell companies are being systematically dismantled by international financial authorities. For the first time, genuine concern flickered across Richard's face. That's impossible. The contingency protocols were disabled 48 hours ago. Your dead man's switch will never activate. The 2 men flanking Richard shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. They hadn't signed up for a losing battle. Even if that's true, Richard recovered quickly. The technology is already distributed. Aurora's core architecture has been implemented in systems beyond your reach. Compromised versions, yes, I acknowledged. Missing key components and containing code that allows us to identify and isolate them. Did you really think Sam's team wouldn't build safeguards against unauthorized replication? That was literally the purpose of Aurora, securing data against advanced threats, including insider threats like you. Richard's composure was cracking now, the confident facade giving way to calculation as he reassessed his position. One phone call, he said, his voice hardening. One call to my contacts, and certain sensitive materials regarding Meridian's historical business practices become public. The board's various indiscretions, the regulatory corners cut during product development. You won't survive the scandal. More threats, Richard? That's your fallback position. I shook my head. We've already disclosed everything to the relevant authorities. Every questionable decision, every regulatory gray area. Full transparency is part of our corporate renewal. Whatever you think you can expose has already been addressed. This was the turning point. The moment Richard realized he had lost control not just of the situation, but of the narrative itself. His entire career had been built on manipulating information, maintaining leverage through selective disclosure and strategic threats. The concept of voluntary transparency was so foreign to his operating model that he had never considered it as a potential countermeasure. You've destroyed decades of value, he said, real anger finally breaking through his polished exterior. The partnerships I built, the positioning I established, all sacrificed for what? Some misguided ethical stand? The market doesn't reward virtue, Teresa. It rewards results. You're right about one thing, I conceded. The market rewards results. But you've confused manipulation with genuine value creation. Meridian doesn't need your kind of results anymore. I moved toward the desk, reclaiming the space he had attempted to dominate. Your partnerships were exploitative. Your positioning was a facade. And the value you claimed to create was actually stolen from the very people who trusted you to lead them. Behind me, I heard the elevator doors open, followed by the measured steps of multiple individuals entering the floor. The FBI had arrived, right on schedule. This is your legacy, Richard. Not the visionary leader you pretended to be, but a common thief who betrayed his company, his colleagues, and ultimately himself. As federal agents entered the office, Richard's expression shifted from anger to something unexpected. A flash of genuine respect. Well played, Teresa, he said quietly as he was instructed to stand for handcuffing. Perhaps you aren't too soft for this world after all. Watching him being led away, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sense of closure. Richard's final assessment, delivered as a seeming compliment, revealed how fundamentally he had misunderstood what true strength in leadership requires. The confrontation that had begun with his attempt to dismiss me after 25 years had culminated in this moment of truth. But the victory wasn't mine alone. It belonged to everyone at Meridian who had refused to accept Richard's version of corporate reality, a world where value could only be created through manipulation and fear. As the elevator doors closed behind Richard and his federal escorts, Patricia appeared in the doorway, relief evident in her expression. "It's over?" she asked. "This part is," I confirmed. "Now, the real work begins. The real work of rebuilding Meridian not in Richard's image, but in alignment with the values that had sustained it through decades of genuine innovation, values that his leadership had temporarily obscured but never fully extinguished." Richard's arrest sent shockwaves through Meridian Technologies that reverberated far beyond our headquarters. Within hours, news networks were broadcasting footage of our former COO being escorted from the building in handcuffs, his composed expression belying the gravity of the charges against him: corporate espionage, wire fraud, money laundering, and attempted murder. The day after his arrest, I gathered with the executive team in what we now called the strategy room rather than the executive conference room. A small but symbolic change representing our shift toward collaborative leadership. The stock has dropped 18% since the market opened, Lena reported, displaying the financial dashboard on the main screen. Better than our projected worst-case scenario of 30%, but still significant. Major customers are requesting emergency briefings, added Neil Patel, particularly those using Aurora components in their existing systems. They're concerned about security vulnerabilities. The press is overwhelming our communications team, Meredith noted. Everyone wants exclusive details about Richard's schemes and his arrest. The challenges were mounting by the hour, but I noticed something important about the team's reports. They were delivered with calm determination rather than panic. Each executive followed their assessment of the problem with proposed solutions, ready for discussion and refinement. This is day one of our new reality, I acknowledged. The next weeks will be difficult, but we've prepared for this. Let's implement the response plan we developed. That plan, created during the tense days after discovering Richard's broader betrayal, provided a roadmap for addressing the immediate fallout from his exposure and arrest. It included protocols for customer communication, investor relations, media management, and employee support. Sam's team has prepared technical documentation for affected customers, Neil continued. We're offering free security audits and remediation, services for any system potentially compromised through NexusCore's stolen technology. I've scheduled a call with our top 20 institutional investors for this afternoon, Lena added. The presentation emphasizes our proactive handling of the situation and the enhanced value of a now secure Aurora platform. Meredith displayed her communication strategy. We're providing a comprehensive press package that controls the narrative while demonstrating transparency. The emphasis is on Meridian's resilience and our commitment to ethical business practices. As the meeting progressed, I was struck by the transformation in these executives. Many had been selected and mentored by Richard, chosen for their willingness to align with his vision. Now, freed from his influence, they were demonstrating capabilities he had either suppressed or never recognized. What about our people? I asked, referring to Meridian's employees who were processing not just a corporate crisis, but a profound betrayal of trust. Helena Duarte from Human Resources had anticipated the question. We've implemented the support framework immediately. Department leaders are conducting small group sessions today, acknowledging concerns and reinforcing our path forward. The Employee Assistance Program has additional counselors available, and we've created a secure internal channel for questions and feedback. The comprehensive response reflected weeks of careful planning. But what impressed me most was how quickly theory had transformed into action. Within hours of Richard's arrest, systems that had existed only as contingency plans became operational realities. By mid-afternoon, I had completed calls with 3 major customers, participated in Lena's investor briefing, and recorded a video message for all employees. Between these commitments, I made time for something Richard would have considered wasteful. Walking the floors of Meridian's headquarters, making myself visible and available to employees at all levels. The atmosphere throughout the building was complex, a mixture of shock, uncertainty, and cautious optimism. In the software division, I found engineers huddled around workstations, systematically reviewing Aurora's code for any remaining vulnerabilities. In marketing, teams were coordinating message discipline across all channels. In finance, analysts were modeling various recovery scenarios to guide our decision-making. Everywhere, people were engaged not in panic, but in purposeful activity. The paralysis that might have followed such a dramatic leadership crisis had been replaced by focused determination. It's not what I expected, Sam commented as we observed the software team's coordinated response. I thought there would be more fear, more disruption. People rise to challenges when given the right support and clear direction, I replied. Richard never understood that. He thought control required keeping people off balance. By late afternoon, the first quantifiable impacts of our response plan were becoming evident. Several key customers had issued statements reaffirming their partnerships with Meridian following their security briefings. Two major industry analysts had published assessments that praised our transparent handling of the crisis. The stock price, while still down, had recovered several percentage points from its morning low. More telling were the qualitative signals. Employees who had operated in silos under Richard's leadership were now collaborating across departmental boundaries. Information that had previously been tightly controlled was flowing freely to those who needed it. Decision-making was happening at appropriate levels rather than being bottlenecked at the top. That evening, as I reviewed the day's developments, in my office, Victoria Reynolds appeared at my door. "The FBI finished their initial interview with me," she reported. "They're particularly interested in Richard's international connections." "How are you holding up?" I asked, noting the fatigue evident in her posture. "Better than expected." She managed a small smile. "There's something liberating about finally speaking the whole truth." Victoria had taken a significant personal risk in coming forward with her knowledge of Richard's operations. As his former executive assistant, she could have been implicated in his crimes. Instead, her cooperation had proven invaluable to both Meridian and federal investigators. "The board has approved your consultant position," I informed her. "Your knowledge of Richard's methods will be crucial as we continue to unravel his schemes." "Thank you for that opportunity," she said. Not many companies would trust someone who was so close to the center of a fraud operation. "You were manipulated by a master," I replied. "And when the moment of choice came, you did the right thing despite considerable personal risk." After Victoria left, I turned my attention to the preliminary damage assessment compiled by our financial team. The numbers were sobering, but not catastrophic. Richard's diversion of funds had cost Meridian approximately $42 million over 8 years. Significant, but manageable for a company of our size. The attempted theft and compromise of Aurora represented a more substantial threat, but one we had largely contained before irreversible damage occurred. What couldn't be quantified was the impact on Meridian's culture, the erosion of trust, the suppression of innovation, the fear-based decision-making that had gradually infiltrated the organization under Richard's leadership. These effects would take longer to address than the financial and technological challenges. Around 7 p.m., Diane Morrison arrived for our scheduled update to the board chair. "You've had quite a day," she observed, taking the seat across from my desk. "The whole company has," I corrected. "I'm just one part of the response." Diane nodded, approvingly. "That perspective is exactly why the board confirmed your appointment as permanent COO this afternoon." The vote was unanimous. The news took me by surprise. I had assumed the board would conduct an extensive search before making a permanent decision, particularly given the circumstances. "What about the interim CEO position?" I asked. Our previous CEO had taken early retirement shortly after Richard's initial exposure, creating a leadership vacancy that the board had been addressing separately from my role. "That conversation is ongoing," Diane replied. "But your handling of this crisis has made a strong impression. Don't be surprised if that opportunity presents itself sooner rather than later." As Diane departed, I found myself reflecting on the strange path that had brought me to this moment. 3 weeks ago, I had been a division director facing dismissal after 25 years of service. Now, I was the confirmed COO helping to rebuild the company from the inside out. The irony wasn't lost on me. Richard had dismissed me as too soft for the corporate world, yet his definition of corporate strength, manipulative, controlling, exploitative, had ultimately proven to be his greatest weakness. What he had never understood was that genuine, organizational strength comes from empowering people rather than dominating them. The following morning brought new challenges. Nexus Corp's CEO had made a public statement distancing himself from Richard and claiming the company had been misled about the origins of certain technologies. A preliminary hearing in Richard's case had been scheduled, with his legal team already floating a defense strategy that characterized his actions as aggressive but legitimate business practices. But the morning also brought signs of Meridian's resilience. Our stock had stabilized, customer retention remained strong, and employee attendance was at normal levels despite the ongoing disruption. The executive team gathered for our now daily crisis response meeting, but the tone had shifted subtly from reaction to reconstruction. "We've completed the technical audit of all Aurora implementations," Sam reported. "The compromised code has been identified and isolated in all deployed versions. The remediation process is underway with full customer cooperation. The financial markets are responding to our transparency," Lena added. 2 analyst reports this morning specifically cited our textbook crisis management as a reason for maintaining buy recommendations despite the short-term volatility. Meredith's update was particularly encouraging. The media narrative is shifting from company in crisis to company demonstrating resilience. Several business publications have requested interviews about our leadership transition and corporate renewal. As the meeting progressed, I noticed a subtle but significant change in how team members interacted. The hesitation that had characterized early discussions, remnants of Richard's culture where speaking too freely could have consequences, had been replaced by confident engagement. People challenged assumptions, offered alternatives, built on each other's ideas without concern for hierarchy or territory. "There's something else we should discuss," I said as the formal agenda concluded. "The culture Richard created didn't develop overnight, and it won't be fully transformed by his removal. We need to be intentional about the environment we're building to replace it." The ensuing conversation revealed how deeply Richard's leadership style had affected every aspect of Meridian's operations. Fear of retribution had stifled innovation. Information hoarding had created unnecessary inefficiencies. Loyalty to Richard had often been rewarded over competence or results. "We've been operating under these conditions for so long that some practices feel normal when they shouldn't," Neil observed. "Just yesterday, I caught myself hesitating to share information with the marketing team because that would have triggered Richard's disapproval." "I've been maintaining separate presentation decks," Meredith admitted. "One with complete data for my own use, and a filtered version for broader sharing, a habit from when Richard insisted on controlling which metrics were visible to other departments." These revelations led to a broader discussion about the kind of organization Meridian should become, one built on transparency, collaboration, and shared purpose rather than control and compartmentalization. As the meeting concluded, Helena, from HR, made an unexpected announcement. "Applications for internal transfers and promotions have increased 340% since Richard's arrest. People who felt trapped in their roles are suddenly seeing possibilities for growth." This statistic, more than any financial or operational metric, demonstrated the immediate impact of our leadership change. Employees who had been operating in a climate of fear were beginning to envision new futures for themselves within Meridian. The transformation was just beginning, with many challenges still ahead. Richard's legal proceedings would keep his betrayal in public view for months. The full extent of his schemes would take time to unravel. Rebuilding customer and investor confidence would require consistent demonstration of our new approach. But the immediate impact was undeniable. In just 48 hours following Richard's arrest, Meridian had begun to evolve from a company defined by one man's manipulative leadership to an organization drawing strength from its collective capabilities. As I prepared for an afternoon of customer calls, I glanced at the simple framed quote I had placed on my office wall, the only decoration I had added to Richard's former space. "The strength of a company is measured not by the power of its leaders, but by the potential they unlock in others." It was a philosophy Richard had never understood, but one that would guide Meridian's renewal in the wake of his betrayal. 3 months after Richard's arrest, the transformation at Meridian Technologies had progressed from emergency response to fundamental reinvention. The initial shock had given way to purposeful reconstruction as we systematically addressed not just the symptoms of Richard's corrupt leadership, but the underlying conditions that had enabled it. On a crisp Monday morning, I stood before a very different audience than the frightened, uncertain employees who had gathered for our first post-arrest company meeting. Today's town hall filled Meridian's largest conference center, with additional employees joining via secure video from our offices worldwide. The energy in the room was palpable, focused, engaged, expectant. Today marks an important milestone, I began, abandoning the podium to walk among the assembled employees. The completion of our organizational redesign and the formal launch of Meridian's new operating model. On the massive screens behind me, a simple diagram appeared. Nothing like the complex, hierarchical organization chart that had defined Meridian under Richard's leadership. Instead, it showed interconnected teams organized around core capabilities and customer needs, with information flows emphasized over reporting lines. For too long, our structure reinforced division and control rather than collaboration and innovation, I continued. Information was treated as a resource to be hoarded rather than shared. Problems were hidden rather than solved. Success was measured by proximity to power rather than contribution to our mission. Nodding heads throughout the audience confirmed the accuracy of this assessment. These weren't abstract observations, but lived experiences for people at every level of the organization. The model we're implementing today isn't just a new org chart. It's a fundamentally different approach to how we work together. An approach built on 3 core principles: radical transparency, distributed decision-making, and aligned purpose. Over the next hour, the executive team and I outlined the specific changes embodied in the new model, from restructured teams to revamped communication channels, from new performance metrics to reimagined physical workspaces. Some elements had been developed by specialized task forces, others crowdsourced through company-wide input sessions. This transformation isn't top-down, I emphasized. It's being built by all of us, incorporating insights from every level and function. The leadership team's role isn't to dictate solutions, but to remove obstacles and provide resources for your best ideas to flourish. As the presentation concluded and employees dispersed to department-level implementation sessions, Diane Morrison joined me near the stage. "Impressive turnout," she observed, and more importantly, impressive engagement. I don't think I saw a single person checking their phone during that entire presentation. "People are invested because they helped create it," I replied. "This isn't something being done to them. It's something they're building together." "The board has noticed," Diane said. "Your approval rating in the latest employee survey is unprecedented. 91% confidence in company leadership. That's unheard of during a major reorganization." "It's not about me," I reminded her. "It's about replacing a toxic system with one that actually serves our collective purpose." The journey to this point had been neither simple nor straightforward. Every aspect of Meridian's operations had required examination and often reinvention. Richard's influence had permeated the organization so thoroughly that rooting it out had required systematic effort across multiple domains. Our approach had begun with physical spaces. The executive floor that Richard had designed as a fortress, separated from the rest of the company by restricted elevator access and intimidating security measures, had been completely reimagined. The imposing private offices had been converted to collaborative team spaces and meeting areas available to anyone in the company. My own office was now on the 17th floor, adjacent to the software development teams, with glass walls and an open-door policy. The symbolic impact of these changes had been immediate, but the substantive work of organizational redesign had required deeper intervention. We had assembled cross-functional teams to analyze and reimagine key processes, how decisions were made, how resources were allocated, how performance was evaluated and rewarded. The results challenged many established practices. Decision authority was pushed downward, with clear guidelines about who needed to be informed versus consulted versus responsible for final calls. Resource allocation became transparent, with budgets and priorities visible across departments. Performance evaluation shifted from individual competition to team contribution and collaborative outcomes. Most radical was our approach to information sharing. Under Richard, information had been tightly controlled, with access granted based on seniority and allegiance rather than functional need. Our new framework inverted this principle. All company information was presumed shareable unless specifically categorized as confidential for legal or competitive reasons. The initial implementation of these changes had been met with varying reactions. Some employees, particularly those who had chafed under Richard's restrictive leadership, embraced the new approaches immediately. Others, who had built their careers around navigating the old system, struggled with the transition. "It's like learning a new language," one mid-level manager had confessed during an implementation workshop. "I've spent years figuring out how to succeed in Richard's Meridian. Now the rules are completely different." This observation had led to one of our most important support mechanisms, the Transformation Partnership Program, which paired employees comfortable with the new approaches with those finding the transition challenging. These partnerships provided safe spaces for questions, concerns, and guided practice with unfamiliar processes. By the 3-month mark, the impact of these systemic changes was becoming measurable across multiple dimensions. Project completion times had decreased by 24% due to streamlined decision processes. Cross-functional collaboration, as measured by joint initiatives and resource sharing, had increased by 62%. Employee-initiated innovation submissions had tripled. Most telling was the shift in how problems were addressed. Under Richard's leadership, issues were typically hidden until unavoidable, then managed through blame assignment and damage control. In the new Meridian, early problem identification was rewarded, with resources rapidly deployed for collaborative resolution. This approach was demonstrated powerfully when a potentially serious flaw was discovered in Aurora's newly deployed banking module. Rather than concealing the issue or limiting its visibility, the engineers who found the problem immediately flagged it to all affected teams. Within hours, a virtual war room had assembled, developing both an immediate fix and a systematic solution to prevent similar issues. The entire episode, from discovery to resolution, was documented in a case study shared throughout the company, not to assign blame, but to celebrate the effective response and extract learnings for future situations. Financial markets had noticed the transformation as well. After the initial shock of Richard's arrest and the subsequent revelations about his schemes, Meridian's stock had not merely recovered but surpassed its previous highs. Analyst reports specifically cited the company's cultural renaissance and operational reinvention as key factors driving long-term value. Customer relationships, initially strained by concerns about Aurora's security and Meridian's stability, had largely been restored through our transparent handling of the crisis. Several major clients had actually expanded their engagements, impressed by the company's resilience and renewed innovation capacity. The afternoon following the town hall, I met with Samantha Cooper to review the latest Aurora deployment metrics. As Software Division Director, a position she had formally accepted after initially serving in an interim capacity, Sam had led the critical work of securing and enhancing the platform that remained Meridian's flagship product. Adoption rates are exceeding projections, she reported, displaying usage data from the past quarter. The security enhancements we implemented post-Richard have actually become a major selling point. Customers appreciate that we identified and addressed potential vulnerabilities so proactively. "And the enhanced collaboration framework?" I asked, referring to a feature that allowed secure information sharing across traditionally isolated systems, a technical manifestation of the same principles we were applying organizationally. That's the real game changer, Sam confirmed. It's opening entirely new use cases we hadn't anticipated. The financial services implementation has already generated 3 customer-initiated expansion requests. As we discussed the platform's evolution, I was struck by how Sam's leadership style embodied the changes we were implementing throughout Meridian. She led through expertise and enablement rather than authority and control, creating an environment where her team could do their best work. "There's something else we should discuss," Sam said as our technical review concluded. "The team has been developing a next-generation concept for Aurora, something that goes beyond our current architecture to address emerging challenges in quantum-resistant security." The project she outlined was ambitious, potentially requiring significant investment at a time when Meridian was still recovering from Richard's financial machinations. Under the old regime, such a proposal would have faced a daunting approval gauntlet, with political considerations often outweighing technical merit. "Have you prepared a formal proposal for the investment committee?" I asked. "That's just it," Sam replied. "Under our new resource allocation framework, we don't need advance approval for exploratory development within certain parameters. The team has already built a working prototype using our innovation resource pool. We only need executive review for the scale-up phase." This was precisely the kind of organizational agility we had been working to create, the ability for teams to move quickly on promising ideas without bureaucratic constraints. In the past, such innovation had been stifled by Richard's need to control all significant initiatives. "Show me what you've built," I said, genuinely curious. The prototype demonstration revealed a breakthrough approach to secure data management in quantum computing environments, a solution to a problem that most of the industry had only begun to acknowledge. The potential applications spanned healthcare, financial services, and national security, with both commercial and social impact implications. "This is remarkable work," I acknowledged when the presentation concluded. "How soon could it be market-ready?" With proper resourcing, 9 months, Sam estimated. "We've already addressed the major technical hurdles. Now it's about refinement and scalability." In the old Meridian, such a project would have been carefully guarded, its potential monetized through restrictive licensing and aggressive patent enforcement. Our new approach emphasized value creation through impact rather than control. "Let's bring in partners," I suggested. "Organizations in critical infrastructure sectors who can help refine the real-world applications while we develop the core technology." Sam nodded thoughtfully. "Collaborative development rather than isolated creation. That aligns perfectly with our new principles." This exchange exemplified the systemic changes taking root throughout Meridian. Innovation flowing freely across organizational boundaries. Resources allocated based on potential impact rather than political considerations. Leadership focused on enabling great work rather than controlling it. As I left Sam's office, I passed a newly installed collaboration space where teams from marketing, customer support, and product development were engaged in animated discussion around a digital whiteboard. 6 months ago, these functions had operated in isolation, their interactions formalized and constrained. Now, they were working together naturally, combining their diverse perspectives to solve shared challenges. The transformation visible in that simple scene represented the essence of our systemic change. Rebuilding Meridian not as a hierarchy of control, but as an ecosystem of collaboration. Richard had created an organization optimized for his personal power and benefit. We were creating one designed to harness our collective capabilities for shared purpose. The road ahead would bring new challenges. Cultural transformations are never complete, but rather ongoing journeys requiring constant attention and refinement. Some deeply embedded habits from the Richard era would take time to fully address. External pressures, market shifts, competitive moves, economic changes would test our new approaches in ways we couldn't fully anticipate. But the foundation had been established. The principles guiding our transformation, transparency, distributed decision-making, aligned purpose, had proven their value through measurable results. Most importantly, they had earned the commitment of Meridian's people, who were now active, architects of the company's future rather than passive implementers of one man's vision. Richard's attempt to dismiss me after 25 years had inadvertently catalyzed not just a leadership change, but a complete reinvention of the company he had sought to control and exploit. The systemic changes now firmly established at Meridian ensured that no future leader, including me, could ever again accumulate the unchecked power he had wielded. That, perhaps, was the most meaningful transformation of all. 1 year to the day after Richard called me into his office to dismiss me from Meridian Technologies, I stood on the rooftop garden of our headquarters, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in hues of gold and amber. The space, once Richard's private retreat where he entertained select executives and clients, had been transformed into a communal area open to all employees, symbolic of the broader changes throughout the company. The past 12 months had been the most challenging and rewarding of my career. What had begun as a personal fight for survival against Richard's betrayal had evolved into something far more significant. The reinvention of a company that employed thousands and developed technologies affecting millions. "Thought I might find you here," said Diane Morrison, joining me at the railing. Anniversaries have a way of pulling us toward reflection. As board chair, Diane had been a steadfast ally throughout Meridian's transformation. Her willingness to acknowledge the oversight failures that had enabled Richard's schemes had set a powerful example of accountability for the entire organization. "Hard to believe it's been a year," I replied. "Sometimes it feels like a decade, other times like yesterday. Given what's been accomplished, I'd say a decade's worth of change in a single year is about right." She gestured toward the offices below, where lights still burned in many windows despite the evening hour. The quarterly results were announced. "Today, have you seen them?" "I've been in customer meetings all afternoon." She smiled. "Record growth across all divisions. Aurora deployments up 78% year over year. Employee retention improved by 24%, the highest customer satisfaction ratings in company history." The metrics were gratifying but incomplete measures of the real transformation. Numbers couldn't capture the fundamental shift in how people worked together, how decisions were made, how innovation flourished in an environment of trust rather than fear. "The financial analysts are calling it the Meridian miracle," Diane continued. "They can't quite comprehend how a company in crisis has emerged stronger than before." "It's no miracle," I said. "Just what happens when talented people are finally free to do their best work together." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky as the city's buildings illuminated against the darkening backdrop. Below us, the offices hummed with purposeful activity. Teams engaged in work that mattered, unconstrained by the artificial barriers Richard had erected throughout the organization. "The board meeting is tomorrow," Diane said, changing the subject. "As you know, the main agenda item is the CEO position. Following Richard's arrest and our previous CEO's retirement, I had served as acting CEO while maintaining my COO responsibilities. The interim arrangement, initially planned for 3 months, had extended as the company navigated its restructuring and renewal. "I've reviewed the search committee's final candidates," I responded. "Both external executives have impressive backgrounds." "They do," Diane agreed, "but the board's preference has become clear. We want you to accept the permanent CEO position, Teresa. The formal vote is tomorrow, but I wanted you to have time to consider it tonight." Though not entirely unexpected, the offer prompted a moment of serious reflection. My 26-year journey at Meridian had never been driven by title or position. My passion had always been for the work itself, developing technologies that solved meaningful problems, building teams that brought out the best in talented individuals. I'm honored by the confidence, I said carefully. But I want to ensure we're making this decision for the right reasons. The company has been through tremendous change. Perhaps fresh leadership would disrupt the cultural transformation. That's still taking root, Diane finished. The board has considered this carefully, Teresa. What Meridian needs now is consistency in its leadership approach, not another transition. As we continued discussing the opportunity, my thoughts drifted to Richard and the drastically different paths our careers had taken. His trial was scheduled to begin next month, with prosecutors having amassed overwhelming evidence of his crimes. The man who had once dominated Meridian through fear and manipulation now faced the prospect of spending decades in federal prison. I had visited him once, 3 months after his arrest, seeking closure rather than confrontation. The meeting had been brief but revealing. Stripped of his power and privileges, Richard had shown glimpses of reflection, even regret, though his fundamental belief in his own superiority remained intact. "You've surprised me, Teresa," he had admitted through the visitor's phone. "I never thought you had this in you, remaking the company in your image." "That's where you're still wrong," I had replied. "I'm not remaking it in my image. I'm helping create the space for everyone to shape it together." He had laughed at that, the sound hollow through the plexiglass barrier. Still the idealist. We'll see how long that approach lasts in the real world. A year later, the results spoke for themselves. The collaborative, transparent organization emerging from Richard's shadow was outperforming its competitors across every meaningful metric. The approach he had dismissed as idealistic had proven not just ethically superior, but commercially advantageous. "What's on your mind?" Diane's question brought me back to the present moment. I was thinking about something Richard once said, that I was too soft for the corporate world, that I'd never survive without his protection. Diane shook her head. He fundamentally misunderstood what true strength looks like in leadership. The ability to trust, to empower others, to create environments where people can do their best work. These aren't weaknesses. They're the most potent capabilities a leader can possess, as her assessment aligned with my own evolution over the past year. What Richard had perceived as softness, my focus on teamwork, on ethical considerations, on long-term value creation over short-term gains, had proven to be precisely what Meridian needed during its most challenging period. I'll accept the position, I decided, on one condition. Which is that we formalize the distributed leadership model we've been developing. The CEO should be a steward of the company's purpose and values, not an autocrat controlling its every function. Diane smiled. The board will be pleased to hear both your acceptance and your condition. This approach to leadership is exactly why we want you in the role. As she departed for another engagement, I remained on the rooftop, contemplating the journey ahead. The formal CEO appointment would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, and likely new attempts by external forces to push Meridian toward more traditional command and control leadership models. Resisting those pressures would require vigilance and commitment to the principles that had guided our transformation: transparency over secrecy, collaboration over competition, purpose over power. These weren't simply organizational preferences, but fundamental values that would determine whether Meridian truly became the kind of company I believed it could be. My phone buzzed with a text from Samantha Cooper. Aurora Quantum Prototype passed final verification testing. Team celebrating in Lab 4 if you're free. This seemingly routine update represented something profound. A year ago, such a breakthrough would have been carefully guarded, its details shared only with those deemed politically important. Now it was an achievement celebrated openly, with its primary architect inviting broad participation in the moment of success. I headed for the elevator, descending from the executive floor to the laboratories 17 levels below. The journey itself reflected the organizational distance we had collapsed, the artificial separation between leadership and creators that Richard had so carefully maintained. Lab 4 was alive with energy when I arrived. Engineers, developers, and researchers gathered around a complex array of equipment, their faces illuminated by both screen glow and evident pride. This team had accomplished something remarkable, creating a quantum-secure architecture that would protect critical data against threats still years on the horizon. "Teresa," Sam called out, waving me over. "Perfect timing. We're just running the final demo." I joined the group, listening as a young engineer I didn't recognize explained the technical breakthrough with contagious enthusiasm. The solution was elegant and powerful, exactly the kind of innovation that had drawn me to technology decades ago. "This is extraordinary work," I acknowledged when the presentation concluded. "How did you overcome the decoherence problem?" Instead of answering herself, Sam turned to the youngest member of the team, an intern who had apparently developed the critical insight. As she explained her approach, I was struck by how fully our cultural transformation had taken root. In Richard's Meridian, credit would have flowed upward, with senior leaders claiming achievements regardless of their actual contributions. Now, recognition flowed to those who had truly driven the innovation, regardless of title or tenure. The celebration continued, with the team already discussing potential applications and refinements. This was Meridian's future. Brilliant people, collaborating freely, motivated by the impact of their work rather than politics or position. As I prepared to leave, Sam pulled me aside. "Did you ever think a year ago that we'd end up here? Not just surviving Richard's schemes, but building something better than what existed before?" The question prompted genuine reflection. A year ago, facing dismissal after a quarter-century of service, my focus had been on exposing Richard's betrayal and protecting Aurora from theft. The possibility of fundamentally transforming Meridian had emerged gradually, born of necessity rather than grand design. "I knew we could overcome Richard," I answered honestly. "I didn't know we could create this." I gestured toward the scene before us, the collaborative energy, the shared purpose, the absence of the fear and political calculation that had characterized the company under Richard's leadership. "You know what made the difference?" Sam asked. "You never tried to become another Richard. You didn't replace his system of control with your own version. You dismantled the system itself." Her observation crystallized something I had intuited but never fully articulated. Richard's greatest damage to Meridian hadn't been financial or technological, but cultural, creating an environment where power was hoarded, information controlled, and trust systematically undermined. Our most significant achievement over the past year had been replacing that toxic culture with one built on fundamentally different principles. Later that evening, as I prepared for the next day's board meeting, I reviewed notes from the town hall scheduled for the following week. The quarterly company gathering had been transformed from Richard's stage-managed performances to authentic conversations about challenges, opportunities, and collective progress. My draft remarks included an unconventional announcement: the establishment of a rotational leadership program that would bring diverse perspectives into executive decision-making through temporary appointments from throughout the organization. It was another step toward the distributed leadership model I had discussed with Diane, further dismantling the concentration of power that had enabled Richard's abuses. A knock at my office door interrupted these reflections. It was Patricia, who had transitioned from executive assistant to head of our newly created organizational development department, leveraging her intimate knowledge of Meridian's culture to guide its evolution. "I have something for you," she said, placing a small box on my desk. "The team thought you might want this for tomorrow's board meeting." Inside was a simple pin bearing Meridian's new logo, the interconnected nodes, that had replaced Richard's sharp-edged corporate emblem. The redesign had been created through a company-wide collaborative process, with the final selection voted on by all employees. "It's from all of us," Patricia explained, "to mark the anniversary." The gesture was meaningful not for its material value but for what it represented, the collective appreciation of a company that had found its way from crisis to renewal. not through the vision of a single leader, but through the combined efforts of thousands who had reclaimed their organization from the shadow of corrupt leadership. "Thank you," I said simply. "This means more than you know." After Patricia left, I turned to the window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Richard awaited trial. His empire of deception collapsed around him. He had built his career on the belief that corporate success required manipulation, control, and the concentration of power. He had dismissed my approach as naive, my focus on technology and teams as weakness. 1 year later, the evidence was clear. Meridian was thriving not despite the values Richard had scorned, but because of them. Transparency had replaced secrecy. Collaboration had replaced competition. Distributed authority had replaced centralized control. The company was stronger, more innovative, and more resilient than at any point in its history. The irony was profound. Richard's attempt to dismiss me after 25 years had been meant to remove an obstacle to his schemes. Instead, it had triggered a transformation that repudiated everything he represented and validated the approach he had so consistently undermined. His words from that final confrontation, "You'll never survive this. You're too soft for the corporate," or always have been, had lost their sting entirely. They had become merely the opening lines of a very different story than the one he had imagined. A story not of defeat, but of renewal, not of individual triumph, but of collective possibility. As I prepared to accept the formal CEO role the following day, I knew that the greatest challenge ahead would be maintaining our commitment to this different vision of corporate leadership, one based not on dominance, but on service, not on fear, but on trust, not on control, but on purpose. It was a challenge worth embracing, not just for Meridian, but for everyone who believed that business could be conducted with both integrity and success, that organizations could be both profitable and humane, that leadership could be both effective and ethical. Richard had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps most fundamentally about what constitutes true strength in the corporate world. The past year had demonstrated that compassion isn't weakness, collaboration isn't inefficiency, and integrity isn't naivete. They are, in fact, the building blocks of sustainable success, creating organizations that not only generate value, but are worth the investment of our talents, our time, and our trust. That was the lesson of Meridian's transformation, and the legacy I hoped to help secure in the years ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.